Sunset Boulevard on a boulevard. And we are ready to go. Although that would be an interesting competition. And hello everyone, how are we all doing? Bruships is in theory, he says. In theory, live. Hello, how are we all up to? What are we all doing? Oh. Right then. So today I've got a few books. Not many. About 6 books I'm planning on having a look through. Mostly I thought I'd be answering questions and talking about things. And I thought also, well, as you all know, I haven't managed to actually eat today because of something, which will remain nameless, something, which might be black, white, and fluffy and not sat so far away from me, which basically meant that after I got back from my exercise wander over Headley Heath, decided to go, ooh, I need even more attention. So that's why I put a post out, which basically was going, what foods do you want me to order? And I have to admit, I might actually edit the result, because the result is overwhelmingly in favour of Chinese food, but at 38 votes. And if I'm going to order Chinese food, I then have to think out what I'm going to eat, and whether that Chinese supplies chopsticks. I suppose I could cheat. This is going to be an interesting question. What Chinese can I get that I can eat while talking to you all? This is a question, because I don't really want to be folding up pancakes in front of you all, because that'd be... really interesting. The picture's a bit bright. Dang. Yes, we have light somehow showing through the clouds, but I can't put across the curtain or anything on that side, because if I do, there is a fluff which won't be able to get in and out, and they will complain. So I'm going to instead look like I am the Phantom of the Opera, you know, with a sort of half face covered in a white mask. Or maybe I'll go the full thing and go, hello, I am now... Ooh, look at how young I look with this. You can't see any of my wrinkles. It's useful. Hello, Carl McGasberg, John Shea, Anna Paul, Peter Tolson, Timmy Looker, and Bad Guy 229. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Hello, Sean Mac. Right then. I've been having a fun day. How are you all doing? I have got Iron Brew. I have got 6 books. 7 books. Sorry. Bad maths earlier. And I think it's the week which I'm going to have quite a lot of questions in. I'm fairly certain I'm going to get quite a lot because of the long patrols that come up this week and long patrols that come up next week, and because of the huge videos that my good friend Drac NFL has put out, who, despite my best efforts to, distract him this week and keep him busy, has managed to put out 2 massive ones for me to deal with, which is always fun. It always is. Yeah. The stream's bitrate is currently a bit lower than recommended. Yeah, let's have a conversation with the bitrate. Oh. Ooh. Actually, give me a second. That should be back. And that might make things a little bit better, because I realised it was still at 60 frames a second. And 60 frames a second is pretty... how do I put this? Over the top for what I'm doing. So apologies for that. I put it up to 60 frames a second when I'm doing the recordings of UAD and other games, because to try and keep that as accurate as possible. But it really doesn't need to be more than 30 frames a second for me. Right then. As we started, I should really look at the food order, because I'm hungry. And because you have been voting. There have been 40 votes, of which 16 are for Chinese takeaway. So, and 10 are for a burger. It's quite a nice mix, actually. Chinese, it will be ordered. Let's see. Have a nice home-cooked meal. I'd love a home-cooked meal, but unfortunately, I arrived too late for the home-cooked meal. So, Chinese takeaway. Where is my local Chinese? Which one's the one I like from this list? It's currently open. This is why one has Deliveroo, because Deliveroo takes care of it for me in terms of remembering who I like. Yes, I am that bad. I do. I'm going to apologize now. That is literally my option. Oh, I don't. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good. I have a choice between Fortune Cookie, Black Panda, Shanghai Sally, Lucky House, Paya Lotus, or Paya Yule. I'm going to go for Paya. They are expensive, but they are very, very nice. Let's see, what was the last one I ordered from them? I don't want that. I don't want those. So I will add that. And what else do I fancy? Do I fancy anything else from the local Chinese takeaway? No, 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 no. Do they do chop suey? Sorry about this, everyone. Oh, they do chop suey. They do chop suey sauce. Oh, no thanks. No, not the way they're putting that. Yeah. Go to checkout. Add. Ooh. Add those. View basket. 55 pence for free delivery. There is nothing I can get for 55 pence, so it's just going to have to be paid for. And yeah, place my delivery order. Right then, food is on its way. Ribs and Singapore curry. Agree on the ribs. Not sure about Singapore curry from my local Chinese takeaways. I love them dearly, but there's some stuff which you only get if you're in Singapore. And one of the things I find, it's going to sound strange, I don't really eat curry in the UK, and I don't really eat all those things when I'm in the UK, because it never tastes right. It either is the person is putting in so much spice it has no flavour, it's just heat to burn your mouth, in which case there's no point in it, or it's so little spice, you might as well just be calling it a stew. Right. Team Looker, if you're getting Chinese, can you talk about the history of China Station? I can actually do that, but even better, I've got my book on the China Station not that far away from me. Where is my giant book on the China Station? We all know I do have an absolutely enormous book on the China Station, which I have now managed to make. Oh, it's up there. I can get to that. Yes, I do have a very big book on the China Station. If you want me to talk about the China Station, I should really get the big book out. This is going to be a small scramble. Ah. Oh. Oh, yes. There you go. Oh. Oh. That was good exercise, wasn't it? That was very good exercise. There you go. China Station. The book I made Glyn Stewart get. Hello, my blackmailer. How are you doing? You just like having a bow on. I think you're cute. Not too many books. Have to admit, I am starting off all this discussion. Yes? Chinese is ordered.
Oh, so I wondered whether
the decision was made.
The delivery.
Yes. You all don't realise. Just a quick thing. This person is the sister who you hear about.
It's the delivery girl.
Delivery girl, as she's calling herself today.
And by the way, there was from the survey if people would like to fill it out, but read it before you do it out to humans.
I will do. It'll be fun. We'll see what we can do. I can fix that. Sorry. Students just sent who is one of my sister's dissertation students has just is having to redo her dissertation and just sent through some materials, and my sister's basically saying, this is your skill set, fix it. And you saw there my pile of books for today and other things I'm working on. Yes, there is a bit of a mess in my office, I have to admit, because all the wood, everything's been in here, because at some point during the next couple of weeks, I plan on actually completing the construction process of the office. And when I do get them all done, I'll be a very, very happy man, because it'll all be finished. But I do have some very interesting books. Yes, and China Station. If you look in the China Station, this is the best book, Jonathan Parkinson. It's an amazing book to get. It's the Royal Navy China Station, 1864-1941. Glyn Stewart's now got a copy because he was basically asking about the China Station. I said, this is the one you have to get. He tried to get the online digital version, couldn't find the digital version, got it, and has just decided that this is the book he's going to get himself buried in. Team Locker just saw the most exciting British Grand Prix for a long time. Cool. They have been getting better. Guys, since you come from Tankfest, have you seen the KF-51 Panther? Well, working prototype. I'm trying to remember all the things I did see at Tankfest. I spent a fair amount of time at Tankfest arguing with various things, and I don't think one of them was a Panther. But there were some rather cute ones. I spent a lot of my time arguing with people who are basically going, well, because this equipment wasn't some perfect imaginary piece of equipment that never existed, it was therefore a terrible piece of equipment. And I was just going, no. Hi, Steve Richards. Hannah, Andrew, and Paul. Old history question. The 1930 London Naval Treaty allows the category of heavy cruisers to go up to 13,500 tons, but with same displacement quotas for cruisers. Reconstruction of the cruisers is permitted. Under the limit of 10,000 tons, do the signatories down gun their existing cruisers or reasonably well armored light cruisers and build new heavy cruisers, or does something else happen? It would all depend on what everyone else did. It would depend on who was the first person, because if you can build an 18-inch cruiser of 13,500 standard tons, that's probably going to work out as de facto, fully loaded, fully displaced, let's be honest, probably somewhere in the region of 17,000 tons, which is getting on to being a reasonable amount. It's still not going to be armoured as well against 8-inch fire as it'll be against 6-inch, but it'll be more capable against 8-inch fire, and you can probably get in... probably could get 12 8-inch guns. Now, if you've got 12 8-inch guns, then whilst if you're still limited in terms of light cruisers to your 10,000 tons and 12 6-inch guns, probably, if you're trying to be a balanced design, you've then got a scenario, well, why the 6-inch does have a greater rate of fire? The 12 6-inch is not 12 6-inch versus 8 to 10 8-inch. It's versus 12 8-inch. And then they have range. And let's put it this way, it becomes a far more complicated question. And it also depends on how they pursue it. It depends on what kind of Royal Navy pushes in. Because let's be honest, if you go with the Royal Navy and they do a 13,500 standard tons, that's 17 to 18,000 ton, probably a fully loaded design with in the Rodney Nelson form, i.e., the efficient ship design with all weapon guns forward, you could be dealing with something which is fairly fast, fairly heavily armored, and fairly heavily armed. But if they try and keep the traditional cruiser lines, that's going to affect the efficiency of the design overall. So it's one of those things where if the question was made and I had a full long time to answer, I could probably give you a rough idea of an answer. It's kind of like the question that often comes up about Taranto when I'm doing that, the wargaming scenario. None of these games are perfect. Someone once said, "What's the scientific basis of these games?" And honestly, they're dice and chance. You just do them enough, and that gives you a rough idea of what you should sort of expect. But the fact is, the moment you have humans involved, you can't really accurately predict the future at all because at sort of the micro level, at the large scale level, you sort of have an idea because groups of humans tend to work in certain ways in broad strokes. But the finally, you look at the fuller detail, the less and less accurate a picture you can produce. Nice again. A Mercedes Alfa Romeo Williams and Alfa Tauri collided on the rundown onto turn one on lap one with the Alfa rolling over. That does sound rather interesting. I have to say, I was probably walking across Headley Heath and trying to motivate myself not to stop in the Smith & Weston for a giant lunch. Nice one. How much did the demise of the two Type 42s and two Type 21s play in the failure of the Horizon project? You see, I often think the reason, and I prescribe to a very specific theory over the way the Horizon project died. There are many, it's a thing which dies of 1,000 cuts, but broadly speaking, it dies because of what the French and the Italians were seeking from it versus the British. If it had been the Horizon project rather than the Horizon frigate project, and they'd done sort of like what's happened with the Type 26, where you've got a scalable model, a scalable hull design, you'd probably had the British go with the largest of the hull designs and pull it out and it would look like a destroyer. You'd have had the French go with the middle of the road design, and it would be depending on the destroyer or frigate, depending on what they were respective, and the Italians go with the smallest design because that's what they needed. And I think that's the problem. There was actually a really interesting question in the live, which was basically, do you think we should have European standardized designs? And my response to that is always, you can have European standardized systems, but you don't need. The moment you start going on designs, it's that whole thing of broad strokes versus micro. If you've got a European pool of technology, sort of radars, etc., being advanced and pushed forward, or rather a NATO pool, which would probably actually be more cost effective and work better, that works better than if you go right then. Everyone's going to have this, and you're going to have the same type design of ship because that's where things break down. Because, hang on, the French and the Italians, do they need their ships to operate in the South Atlantic that often? No. Do the British need to worry about the South Atlantic? Yes. So that's going to change the shape of the hull and what you want from the hull design. The moment you've got the hull of the North Atlantic and South Atlantic being a constant part of your operational cycle is going to have a massive impact on your hull shaping and hull form. Because you can operate in them, and you will operate them in them on a regular basis, and that's a different design you're going to produce. So this is the reality of the problem. It's not so much a case of yes, we should have standardized designs. No, we need standardized systems that we can plug into designs which fit us, and that would work very well. Thank you. Team Locker, too many books. There are lots and lots of books. I've got to finish off the bookshelves down below. You can't see it, but I have things like I have a paint. I have everything in here. This is the blue paint for the outside, actually. But I have the flooring. I have the paint for the inside here. All the stuff has arrived and is here, just sitting in my office, ready to be deployed. And also sitting here in my office is the big thing I'm going to stick outside to provide protection for the stuff which I'll be taking out. Hello, DG40. Hello, Melon1640. Is my connection playing up, or is this stream stuttering from time to time? It shouldn't be stuttering from time to time. It might have been at the beginning because it was trying to deal with it at 60 FPS. And it always causes fun when I try and broadcast live on 60 FPS. So I've downrated it down to 30. And that usually sets it as okay. So hopefully that's all right, and hopefully there's no problems now. And report, I doesn't do that. I meant to have oats and toast night, but accidentally burnt my bread and toast. And have oats and Scotch coffee, made as per the recipe told by Duck in the Felt. Nice. Nice agreement. Paul Amos. Hello, Paul. Hello, Marga. Nice agreement. Why didn't the Royal Canadian Navy take Enterprise when it's considered transferring to RNCN in October 1944? Because they didn't want to. There's many other things they wanted to man, and you only have a finite number of people. And a DG40 coming out. 51 Panther's new concept from Reinhold lighter than Leo 2. 120mm L52 autoloader, free crew with a fourth option for Beyond the Horizon loitering ammunition launcher. Active events sounds pretty cool. Jeff Beeler, I was asking. They don't bring future prototypes to Tank Fest. Sadly enough, they don't. I wish they did. Would I be right if the line got upgrades like described last week? They could do 4 goalkeepers, but not the Sea Cat or the Sea Dart, given the main gun blast would wreck the electronics. Goalkeepers, yes. Sea Cat. Strange enough, they might actually be able to do Sea Slug. Because that's a fairly robust thing designed for a ship which is firing. Sea Dart, you'd have to put in some shock absorbers. Seriously, it would have to be on the aft of the ship, and you would have to somehow raft all the machinery. Because Sea Dart is ludicrously sensitive for that kind of scenario. Andrew, sorry, minor amendment to my earlier question. Displacement quota for heavy cruisers increased as per the increase in displacement allowance, i.e., that is heavy cruisers technology increased by 30%, 5%. Yeah, they're definitely going to be building maximum heavy cruisers, but they're going to be, they'll be building heavy cruisers. A lot of them. If you were to replace the Lions 8 Admiralty boilers with Rolls-Royce WR21 gas turbines, how many would actually be used if 28,000 shafts horsepower, 28,000 is too much? Well, let's see. 21 gas turbine. You do realize I'm going to have to do some actual checking, some maths here before I answer this one. Let's see. So, propulsion. The G conversion system, power conversion system, which adapts the gas turbines, the WR21 gas turbines. If we go back to the Invincible class, that's probably a better one to go back to the Invincible class. See what their system. that'd be more like I'd be sort of looking for engines. So actually, you are using the WR21, which is a very modern system. I think you're probably more likely to use the Rolls-Royce Olympus TM3B, which were pretty darn good ones, and those ones from that period. So they had 4 of those, which gave them, using their conversion systems, 100,000 shaft horsepower. So Lion class battleships, they were conceived as having 4 shafts and 130,000 shaft horsepower. So you probably want about 6. You probably want to put in about 6 Rolls-Royce Olympus TM3Bs, which would give you roughly 150,000 shaft horsepower, which will give you a speed increase, but, you know. If I was to replace it with the WR21s, which are the ones from the modern ships from Type 45 destroyers, they have 2 of them, and they give the ship 28,800 shaft horsepower each. So, honestly, to get to the Lion class, I would need, leveled in terms of shaft horsepower, I need at least 5. Probably, though, again, I'd still go with 6. But that would give me 5 would be enough, because 5 would be 140,000 shaft horsepower. No, 144,000 shaft horsepower, which still would give me 14,000. Would give me 144. Yeah, 14,000 shaft horsepower more than I need. So that would still give me a speed bump. Wouldn't be quite as massive as it could be, but it would still give me a speed bump. So yeah, I'm looking at 5 to 6. I need to replace the 8 engines if I wanted to maintain the level of shaft horsepower I currently have. Hello, Seneca Nero. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Constantinopolis. Shomek, as someone who's been running a double blind war game, I have to resist the urge to punish some of the players for being annoying. It's always an urge. So anyway, what would dreadnoughts look like if they got modern 21st century power plants? A lot faster. Probably not. They were defined more by their guns and their fire technology. But let's be honest, if you consider the power ratio of the Type 45, and you go back to HMS Dreadnought, and you consider that she does everything she does with 23,000 shaft horsepower for 18 boilers. So, in the nicest way, if you gave her the same power plant you've got in a Type 45 destroyer, you'd be more than doubling her horsepower. So, you would probably see Dreadnought achieve comfortably 30 plus knots. Well, might take her a long time to get up there, but it would be certainly would be an interesting thing to watch. Let's say 28, actually, considering the hull form. Go on, Cameron. The issue with wargaming to practice the scenarios in the military is the inbuilt bias of the brass, ignoring the results they don't like. Yeah, that is always a problem. Hello, Cody85. Hello, Ian. How did the glut of war-built merchants affect the civilian shipyards after World Wars? Well, for start, in short term, it provides them a lot of work because they have to refit the ships and upgrade them. Long term, it means that you have not much construction going on, and then while the ships are in service, and then when they all start to fade out, suddenly the building comes in. So if you've managed to keep going, you're going to have a lot of work. If you've not managed to keep going, you basically collapse. Anyone know what the shirt says? It's Monster University. Seemed appropriate for a lecturer to be wearing. You don't study scaring. You just do it. Seneca, take care, Seneca. The cruisers and DDs at that period. Yeah, basically, you're talking about giving them an engine power system which is so much more powerful than what they have, it would be obscene. They would be, honestly, able to do pretty much anything. It'd be quite interesting, though, to watch. It is one of my okay, one of my pet histories is to go back in time and say, look, what happens if someone takes back a 1950s era steam power plant, which they could probably still support, and turbine set, and the technology needed to build it, and the manuals, to 1904, and has those included in the Dreadnought. And also takes back, I don't know, the plans for 16-inch guns and the appropriate triple turrets. The Dreadnought you get is technologically feasible at that time. It's a massive leap, but it's technologically feasible at the time. But it changes the world dramatically. Basically, the thing is, if you're launching a ship which has 15, 16-inch guns and is capable of nearly 30 knots in 1905, it's going to take a long time for anyone to catch up with you if they haven't got those same advantages. And it really would do what, in a nicer way, the British government was hoping, and Jackie Fisher sort of sold Dreadnought as a way of ending wars for at least a short term. Hi, Jonathan Burrow. Hi, Stafford. That's right. On the lines, I mentioned last week having a speed of 32.5 knots with those refitted engines. Yeah. It probably would do. Mm-hmm. Hi, Danny, right? Random question. Andrew Paul. Random question. Which 1910s or 1920s ocean line that survived World War II to get scrapped in the late 40s or early 50s would you like to see have an active and post-war sailing career? Oh, there are some really cute ones. Honestly, let's see. I think the one I really liked and I was quite happy that she had the career she did have was the Queen Mary. See, that's the problem. The one she was built in 1936, and I liked the Queen Mary, and I'm glad she's had a bit of a career. She's currently in Long Beach, California, and is not exactly necessarily the best treated of vessels there, but she's a good ship, and she certainly deserves to be preserved. But would like to see have an active and prosperous post-war sailing career. Well, the Queen Mary had one, pretty much. Although she managed to actually survive longer than the 1940s and 50s. She's still around today. Although not sailing anymore. 1900, if the Russians lose the Baltic and Black Sea fleets, as they can't afford them, what do? Panic. But honestly, I don't see them losing those fleets. I don't see them. There is no way they allow the Black Sea Fleet to go, and honestly, the Baltic, that's more of a problem for them, but that fleet might have to transition into. Well, honestly, you can either go all powerful or you have to go small and fast to survive. Especially with Sweden and Finland joining NATO. That changes things for Russia dramatically in terms of the Baltic. Kevin, how do I see? How much did Jones know about Pearl Harbor before it happened? Not much. If the Japanese, basically, Hitler is surprised into joining the war. If the Japanese did tell them before, would the Germans have asked the Japanese, do you think that's a really good idea? Probably not, because they would have liked the fact that there was a widening of the war and the idea that would keep the Americans busy. There was very much an idea in Germany that it would keep the Americans busy and Americans would focus on the Pacific first. And actually, the Americans end up being persuaded mostly by Churchill in full lambast mode to focus on Europe first. Because the idea is once you've freed up Europe, you've then freed up all those troops and all the technology and all those people to join the war in the Far East. But anyway, how long after the end of World War II in Europe would it have taken for the Royal Navy to retain all the personnel manning the Atlantic escorts of the Pacific War? Huh? How long after the end of World War II in Europe would it have taken for the Royal Navy to retrain, not retain, sorry, I missed the R, all of the personnel manning the Atlantic escorts of the Pacific War? How long to get them specific? Honestly, a lot of them were probably could be transferred immediately. There's not really much retraining. The convoy ships could be used for convoying and supporting the amphibious task group, so that's not going to be much retraining. There have been ships doing amphibious operations and bombardment in the UK, in European and Mediterranean waters, so that's no good in retraining. Basically, it's more a case of refitting the ships for dealing with the hot weather. That's going to take longer than training and transferring the crews. Probably while they're doing that, and they're going to be trained a bit on transition. That's Fox. A really specific question. Do you know any books on the Aragonese Navy, the medieval pre-Iberian wedding kingdom? Ooh. Oh! I wish I had this question for me on. I'd known this question was coming because I was talking to a lovely lady who knows a lot more about that that area and region than I do, and probably ever will do. Actually, on top of my head, I don't know any specific books, but I'll send her a question. I will send her a question. Okay, aren't we already having a sort of unification when it comes to ship equipment? There aren't 20 different missiles to choose from. Well, unless you're French and do everything yourself. That's pretty much happening de facto anyway. But the thing is, and I say this with a lot of love for it all, it's happening, and it's happening in a way which mainly the politicians are keeping out of, which is a good thing. But it's almost trying to make sure that process is standardized. Azowski, aren't we already having a sort of unification? I'll answer that one. They're not. Dr. Clarke, at what point do you think the British Empire became untenable to maintain? I think the British worked out the empire was going to go in about 1870, 1880. That's when the British start to talk about forming a Commonwealth. The British are very realistic. Almost, there's this whole thing that the British Empire peaks in size after World War One. That's when it gets to its largest extent, when you've got all the mandates and various things added in. And the British are already firmly in the process of decolonization. So, yeah, they're not going at a pace which everyone would be happy with, but they are heading in that direction already. And when the empire's at its biggest extent, not because it's so much untenable, but because there's a question of, do you want it? Do you need it to be so big? And is it problematic being big? And is it better for things to be run locally and just be grouped together as a sort of Commonwealth fraternity of nations? Which hopefully do exactly what the British always want them to always do, exactly what the British asked them to. Some of the early writings, I have to admit, are very very, very Lundo egocentric, but there again, you'd expect them to be. Hello, Bokid Israeli. Would the USN have benefited more if the 5 6.4-inch 48 gun being developed for the late war, post-war class, as opposed to historic long-barreled 5-inch guns. 1.4. Basically, you're saying, would they better have been going for a 130mm gun? Ooh, roughly 130mm. There are advantages, but there's not so many that frankly it negates having the 5-inch. Basically, it's a case of half a dozen one, six the other, and honestly, the 5-inch is probably the easier way to go, and it's the way they went. They had the industry, the infrastructure, and everything to support it, so they did. Baron Pulse, if there were dinos in place of Leanders, would Graf Space still close? Would they actually have done more damage via rate of fire or 2 lights of shells? If there were dinos in place of Leanders, probably still would have closed. Probably would. It's the more. It's one of those things. Is they are light cruisers. They're going to close. They suspect that they think they're dealing with destroyers. Honestly, in many ways, a Dido looks even more like a destroyer than a Leander class. A Leander sort of looks like a tribal class. I think that's what they were mistaking them for. They have a similar profile. A Dido can look even more like that. I know it has an extra turret, but you'd have to see that at range. Rate of fire to 5.25 would do a lot of damage to the upper works. Basically, all the unarmored sections of the Graf Spee would probably cease to exist very quickly in that battle. And that's the thing. That could cause a horrendous amount of damage. Would they sink it? I don't think so, but they would do a lot of damage. I think it'd be, broadly speaking, about the same, though, because the Leander crews are freaking vicious. In that they are very good at what they're doing at firing their guns, and they are very accurate. So rate of fire, does it translate to how many does it translate to in terms of shells actually hitting your target? And the difference between a 6-inch and a 5-inch is palatable, but not so much, I think, in terms of overall damage. Nice to go, everyone. How ridiculous is the idea of Canada buying the retired audacious HMS Eagle and leading to Canada with nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, as there is in all history where this plays out? That would require a significant change in the modus operandi and thought process of the Canadian governments post-World War II, even prior to World War II. John Barrett, would you do a video on Klingon warships at some point? I think I might do that. I have been considering it at certain points. There are lots of things I'm considering for the various Christmas specials episodes. Kevin, was Eric Bay a bad choice to command Scharnhorst during the Battle of the North Cape? Things seem questionable, like sending his DDA escort away. What do you think is likely it would have been sunk either way? It would have been sunk either way. Basically, there is no one you can put in that's going to save that ship. The British are bringing in too many resources. Paul Amos, following up the earlier training question, how long would it take to train new RM personnel for effective Navy now? It would be a lot quicker to train the people than it would be to build the ships. Because you'd have to build the yards first. Hello, Ian Stradling. Hello, Tanaverka. Good luck, Jonathan. And Paul. Assuming the RN decides to build a Neptune-class cruiser in 1944-45, let's assume half a dozen are completed, the RN decides to invest the Sound class by sale. Okay. Twelve nations early in the 1950s. Which nations do you see buying these ships? Same it's probably brighter crown colonies. You're probably looking at India, probably looking at Pakistan, probably looking at Australia and Canada. Maybe South Africa. Possibly some South American nations. That's pretty much it. He's probably buys it. Then alright, I have fought Graspay fought the Leanders with J-class destroyers because of single funnel. No, they thought it was they. Let's put it this way. You also have to remember the tribals have one big, one small funnel, and there's debate on the Graspay on the records as to whether they thought it was a tribal or a J class. But it seems to me, in my mind, from some of the things that have been said about specifically the captain's writings and what he thought they were, that he at least seems to be presuming they were tribal class destroyers because of the way they were acting and because of their line out. Because you always have to remember the J class doesn't have that second gun. Plus, and please note this, the J class aren't in service as much in 1939 at this period as the tribals are. The tribals are all in service. The J class are to an extent coming into service still. Okay, so the J class are completed in May and March 1939. There's Jervis and Jekyll. August 1939, Juno and Janus. June, April, June is sort of Javelin, Jersey, and Jupiter, but Jubilance never completed, and Jaguar only comes in service in September 1939. And then you've got the Ks are all later in 1939, and so, the tribals are the ones before them and are more visible and more present and are deployed around the world. The Graspay, remember, almost comes into nasty contact with a tribal during the earlier part of a voyage. If USS Arizona wasn't at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, who then suffers the fate? Whoever's in the easiest to kill spot. Whoever assumes that position and gets that focus. That could be any one of them. It's kind of like my whole point about Julia Cesare. It's that particular positioning of that ship is just so much for its safety. Dreadnought. Dr. C, a fee within bilge pumps, is short-sighted political decisions leading to fiascos of military equipment, as this seems to be a constant problem. What do you think is the realistic solution? I honestly don't know if there is a realistic solution to that one. It's a case of it's a product of elected governments, and I don't want to get rid of elections, and I don't want to have dictatorships. So whatever kind of scenario you're going to deal with, there was a discussion I once had, which was, can we lengthen the terms of politics so sort of make it 8-year cycles? And it's tempting, but it's also that's not that's just going to change the lexicon of what they're looking for. Instead of looking through 4 or 5 years, they're going to be looking for an 8-year term. So that doesn't really help matters because defense tends to be procured on a 20-30-year term. Colin Cameron, having now been on HMS Belfast, I have to ask how did anyone over 5'7" manage to serve on board without getting a constant concussion? Seriously, though, was there a sight limit in certain ships for certain ship departments? Not in theory. In practice, though, there was, and honestly, you learnt to crunch up small. How's that more? Paul Amos, as building new shipyards, the right architect would create employment in the areas which need more. Is the Admiralty putting forward this argument to government, and if so, shouldn't they? I hope they are. Is the government taking any notice? Well, that's a completely different question. And that's also it's a complicated one to try and make the case for because government hears from a lot of people with a lot of different job creation schemes, and the Navy's one can seem more interesting at times than others. It's always fun. Mm-hmm. Right. So, as we've reached the sort of plateau of the questions, let's get one of the books out. Now, I am doing this one armed, but I'll have the second arm back in a second. Hello. I didn't say anything until you said your voice quite loudly. My mom was going for a walk around, and so I'm holding the poodle so he doesn't go dancing around her. Right, so this is, of course, the first book we're looking at today. The Royal Navy's China Station, 1864 to 1941, by Jonathan Parkinson. And I love this book because it is literally a history of the China Station, as it says, as seen through the careers of the commanders-in-chief, 1864 to 1941. Its front cover has an excerpt from Jeremy Blackham. It's always a good sign. We've got 1885 to December 1887. Vice Admiral Richard Vesey Hamilton. Born in Sandwich, Kent, on the 28th of May 1829, youngest son of Reverend John Vesey Hamilton, vicar of St Mary's Church, Sandwich, by his wife Frances Agnes Malone. Aged 83, he died at his home, The Elms, Chalfont, St Peter, Bucks, on Tuesday, the 17th of September 1912. His funeral took place at Eltham in Kent on Monday, the 23rd of September. Educated at Royal Navy School, Camberwell, and he entered the Royal Navy in July 1843. Much early service in the Mediterranean in the paddle sloop Voyagrd, 1,590 tons, under the command of Commander George Graham Otway. Later second baronet, and then for a year in the brigantine Bonetta, 319 tons, Burton, by Commander Thomas Saumarez Brock. Can't think who he's related to. The Lardas service included learning the theory and practice of marine surveying. Subsequent service in the small frigate Spartan, 26 guns, Captain Thomas M.C. Simmons, mate, 1st August 1849. From that date until 2nd March 1850, served in Excellent. And from 2nd March 1815, Discovery Ship Assistance, under the command of Captain Erasmus Orme, during the Arctic expedition of 1850 to 51, searching for St. John Franklin. It was now in the Arctic that he began to make a considerable name for himself. In assistance, for example, he surveyed 2 islands to the north of Prince of Wales Island, these being Lofer and Young. Among the lieutenants senior to him on the ship were Francis Leopold McClintock and George F. Meckham. Lieutenant, on the 11th of October 1851, from 16th of February 1852, served in Resolute, under the command of Captain Henry Callett, and with Commander Francis L. McClintock in Intrepid. This being the Rebelka expedition of 1852 to 1854, again searching for Franklin. In this ship, he continued to enhance his reputation by discovering a northern end of Melville Island, the Sabine Peninsula, 2 off-lying inlets, Vesey Hamilton, and Markham. These would be found approximately 110 degrees west, 77 degrees north. During his journeys, his sledge was named Hope, and his sledge flag was white with a rising sun. Also, throughout the severe Arctic winters, when it was impossible to venture abroad, he was actively involved in the provision of the entertainment aboard. During the 3 winters which they spent in the Arctic, Hamilton acted as a prompter and stage manager to the companies of the Royal Arctic Theatre. Prompter and stage manager. I like that title. It's a very cool book. If you're interested in the basically careers of naval officers, it gives you all sorts of details and all sorts of information. It's a really good book. And I'll put in a timestamp for that, because that basically, let's say, started that at roughly 45 minutes past into the thing. So if I put that in, I can then do a timing at some point. Ba-da-da. Part 2. Oh, Chinese has arrived. That's early. The Royal Navy China Station. Thank you.
I haven't got anything else to do this evening.
Thank you, delivery person. That's very kind of you to bring my food to me. It's very good of you.
Mother suggested you put it on the tapper, actually, but I didn't think you'd get any left.
Oh, I wouldn't get any. If you put it on the tapper, I wouldn't get any. None would survive to reach me. None would survive to reach me. Oh, goody.
Sure?
I love my corgi. I also know his eating intentions. So let's see. We have chicken satay, chicken balls, good, more chicken balls, and sweet and sour chicken. Hot. Most importantly, chopsticks. How can you eat a Chinese while having going for a lie? Well, there's only one chance. As long as you have some chopsticks.
We're going to require.
Do you want a tip?
No, I was just checking you didn't need a bowl.
One would never say no to these things, but I can survive without one.
Good, because that's exactly what you're going to do.
Okay. That's fine. Oh, good lord, that's got vegetation in it. Dang blasted. Vegetation. No, vegetation is not good.
It's not 100% vegetation.
No, it's mostly chicken, thankfully. All right, then. So, questions. Hello, Admiral. Bullen, building. No, so that one. Does the Fox Hope? Are there any major myths in naval history that you think are harmful? Any myths on land on all of those surrounding Wehrmacht? I think when you get views of naval history like British supremacy was unquestioned at certain points in history, that was never the case. You know, we look back and go, British supremacy at sea was never questioned. Well, the entire reason there were varying building races and mobilizations and scares that there were was because British supremacy was being questioned quite regularly. Quite regularly, there were things were questioned. Joshim, listening to Bill Trump's 20. But the discussion on how good Cold War Soviet tech actually was when the US UK finally got to look at it, I'm thinking, where have I heard this before? A lot of years. Oh, yes. IJ and World War II tech. Yes, there's a lot of tech which, yeah. Never presume your opponent is an idiot or is incapable of producing stuff which is good. Next turn. Why were the Orion super dreadnoughts declared obsolete after World War I? Because they didn't have the guns necessary for the Royal Navy at that point. Basically, the Royal Navy wanted bigger guns, and the Orions weren't really useful for what the Royal Navy wanted at that point. They had other ships which were better. And also, you have to remember this about the super dreadnoughts. They are, as nice as they are in terms of good ships in the Orion class, they're very quickly surpassed, because then comes the Queen Elizabeth, the R's, and eventually Hood, and then there's the plans for the G3s and the N3s, and you just go, okay, does in an N3 world, does an Orion have a place? No. It's neither fast enough nor powerful enough to have a place. Chicken's happy. Chris Rowan, did the Haida staff share your concern about Iron Brew reanimating her and permitting the pillaging of the seas? Seeing as they let me actually take Iron Brew aboard her, I don't think so. because if they'd shared that worry, they would never have let me anywhere near here with Iron Brew. And I think if Marg had shared that belief, she'd have probably helped me in distributing the Iron Brew onto the engines to get them to go. Sounds like there was a really nasty crash on Formula One. No. It's, right. New book. I've got a new book to show you. And as I no longer am holding a poodle, I can do that. Naval Battles of the Second World War, Pacific and Far East by Leah Marriott. This is cool. It's got Pearl Harbor to Midway, Southwest Pacific, Forward to Victory. Which, to me, sounds quite Pacific-oriented anyway. And this is the Pacific and the Far East. So it's kind of interesting that Pen and Sword have produced this book. At the same time, they produced this book. Great Naval Battles of the Pacific. So you sort of have to compare the two. And already there's a small problem going on for them, because they're obviously completely different in orientation. This one is trying to look at more battles in theoretically slightly more detail, although on some battles I honestly found more detail than this one. But this one is looking at less battles and is basically a quick overview. So if you want a quick, I want to be able to discuss the Pacific War with enough knowledge that I can actually talk about it and know what the names mean, this one will do. If you want more detail to go hunting and doing some research based off, probably it's this one. Because this is the official Admiralty accounts. But they are both very good books. Very, very good books. Why do we forget that in World War One, it is the pre-dreadnoughts holding the line against Central Powers? They're not really, though. You can argue that in the Mediterranean, maybe to an extent, and definitely from the Russian perspective, but not really. Dr. C, it feels as if we're entering a new era of history, as the pandemic is paradigm-shifting event. While we can't divine the future, what era of history do you think look to inform us now? Well, instinctively, I avoid any mention of World War II, because I just don't think so. I would go more likely, if I was going with the 1890s. You're looking for a multipolar world, and that's the big change. That's the big change we're going to have to deal with. It's coming about, is a multipolar world. In America, it's still going to be the biggest power on the block, probably. Almost, and it would require a massive investment of resources by China for them to actually become the same level of global power in terms of superpower as America. But the thing is, America's going to be primus inter pares, but the difference between them and the rest is not going to be so stark as it was, perhaps, in terms of real power. Now, this is different from military power, because military technology, yes, the American technology might still be phantom zones ahead of the Chinese. It might be. It might not be. He says, eating his Hong Kong style chicken. We don't know. What we do know, and what we do have to think about, is power in terms of peacetime influence. And this is where the whole debate and interesting discussion you get into of cruisers comes into, because people go, oh, yes, the cruiser name or these names are outdated. Well, yes, to an extent they're right, but also to a large extent they're wrong. Because if you have the power you do have in terms of firepower, that's useful. But with a name, you have an idea of the function as well. I ended up having a debate on Twitter today while I was walking with someone whose basic contention was that we should just call all ships warships, large and small, and we shouldn't engage in terms of things of calling destroyer, frigate, etc., because it's just too confusing. And I listened to this debate for a while and I thought about it quite a lot, because I was walking, and I do tend to do a 4 to 5 hour hike most Sundays. It's my thinking time. And I often take a dog with me. Today I didn't actually have one with me, which was a shame. And my view came through as this. That loses a lot. Because the trouble is, a person who's interested in naval history, etc., will understand from warship, versus a person who isn't, will be a massive difference. Because someone who's just not interested just hears warship and goes, well, that's just a warship. Why are the RN deploying a warship to disaster relief? Why are warship going off to do this diplomatic mission, that one? It's a ship of war. Surely we should have peace ships or this ship for that. And it becomes a whole complicated battle. The thing is, I agree, destroyer has morphed from being torpedo boat destroyer to being destroyer to now being an air defense vessel, we would primarily ask, but I would also argue is primarily an anti-threat vessel. And that's what a destroyer started off as destroying torpedo boats. And then when torpedoes moved from being carried by by torpedo boats to aircraft, well, they develop an AA capability, and yes, the aircraft are carrying bombs, but they're still a light threat to the major fleet. Destroyer is a threat engagement. Frigate, anti-submarine warfare. And that's where I get into the whole thing of, well, all ships, modern ships, cruisers. They are. They have to be by default, because you have to have them doing the naval diplomacy missions, they have to do presence missions, they have to do the endurance and the long patrols and all that sort of thing. Which is lovely, but then it gets back to the naming. And this is the real fun, because you can always tell what kind of background you're dealing with when you're having a debate which can become etymological, i.e., distorted words. Because if you're dealing with a really practical person, they'll just go, well, it doesn't matter, we should just stop it. No need. You go, well, that's lovely, but the trouble is those words have meaning. You can't cut those words out. You can't just shoot them those words down and go, that's historical, we don't need that, we just need to do this, and it'll all be simpler. Because it would be, but it also will miss out on a lot of the detail. It'll miss out on a lot of the information. And all the stuff we convey when we're having a discussion. You need nuance, you need context, you need these things in especially a grey war scenario, in a multipolar scenario, where you have to have a debate, where you have to have discussions. Being able to announce you're deploying a frigate, then being able to announce you're deploying a destroyer, so it's something bigger than a frigate, matters. It gives you a step up the level of interest. It gives you another level on your diplomacy. And also, on themselves, we all know frigates and destroyers are warships. But you're not saying you're deploying a warship, which would sound quite a threatening phrase in diplomatic terms. But that doesn't mean that modern ships are not all cruisers, because they're all having to do the cruiser role. And that's where it comes down to that whole 60 seconds video where I've just gone through gone, well, it depends if you're a nomenclaturist and you're going with the name, or you're going with the roles. And things which are named a cruiser probably are a cruiser. But things which are doing the cruiser role are also can be qualified as a cruiser, or need to be designed with an idea of the cruiser duties and cruiser functions in mind. Which is fun. Which has led to a whole discussion of whether certain things are battle cruisers or not. And I have a feeling it's going to end up with me having to do a whole video on French battleships at some point. We'll leave that one side. But guys, how good were the original US 16 cal 16 inch 50 cal from the unbuilt Lexington battle cruisers in South Dakotas? They were okay. They were good guns for World War One era when they were being built, but by World War Two, it's like most things. A lot happens in the 20 years in between World War One and World War Two. A lot happens. Hello, John Sykes. Oh, just got the Terrible Battles Diaries book. I hope you enjoy it. Apologies about the ship missing from the table of tribals. It was in every other version apart from the one which seemed to go reprinted. Don't know how. Alfred B228. If you build a new class of ships, but find problems with the first ship and fix them in the following ships, how extreme can these fixes be before it's a new class? Considering what's happened in history and the precedent of history, very, very extreme. Very, very extreme. There's a talk so. Given England's maritime land tradition, how much influence and power did the Admiralty have in Republican England? Is there books on Republican and Glorious Revolution Navy? There are some really good books. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember them, but there are some really, really good books about the power of the Navy. It's quite unsurprising that the Navy ends up siding with Parliament. The Royal Navy of Charles I sides, to an extent, divides, but the Navy of Charles II, going into James I, sides with Parliament, which is calling in William and Mary. Because by that point, there's been a complete transition in the officer corps. But the Navy gets to keep the royal title, whereas the Army, of course, is the British Army. Because it's technically made up of people who were regicides and usurpers. Yeah, USNI is a good deal. But as John Sykes said, that organization semi-membership dues just on the books I've ordered. Yeah, they are a good deal. They're really nice people as well. I have a lot of time for the USNI. I have a lot of time for them. I have a lot of time for Osprey. Speaking of Osprey, I have to write a book chapter at some point over the next week and do a job application. Renault, given your logic on using class of ships as a way of diplomatic signaling, do larger surface ships make sense in the modern day? Caravels are similar. Yes, they do. Especially for powers who aren't aircraft carriers. If you haven't got an aircraft carrier, it's very sensible to have something you can use as a sort of diplomatic signaling tool in their place. But, you know, if I was China and I wanted to really scare the Americans, yes, building an aircraft carrier is something they can do, but the Americans have got a massive advantage in them. if they started building a Kirov-level nuclear-powered battlecruiser style thing, which is basically what we tend to call the Kirov CC, I have a feeling that would cause an absolute panic attack in a lot of American government, because they can't do the response they did to the Kirovs, which was reactivate the Iowas, because they're now too old. Nice to everyone. Would 18,900 power horsepower be too much worn out Hatra's Hood to take? Let's see. That's going to be that's going to be 160,000 and take off 8,800, which is 151,200 shaft horsepower. You probably need to do some strengthening of the hull, and probably replace some of the plates, and maybe check the keel out. It would be a lot of work, in other words. Considerations, why do you think there is such comparatively few books on the long 19th century naval and maritime history in contrast to 20th and 19th century? Is it because there are few major wars? Yep. Wars are sexy and sell books. They do. That's why my book's entirely structured around a world war, because that's what the publisher advised me. That's in 6831. What happened if surf damage hadn't been so bad from the 1908 end and been refloated after running aground? What is her fate? Probably a prize sitting in Sydney Harbour or something similar. Because I don't think anyone really has practical use for her. Okay, so what would be the World War II versions of modern Type 45 and Arleigh Burke class? Type 45s, as they've been built, are air defense destroyers. So probably Didos. Arleigh Burks. As much as I'm tempted to say Des Moines and cause an argument, I think I'll go with Baltimore's, because I think that's more what they fit in sort of the category of. Why can superpower UK and US coexist so easily when major power Canada requires a weakened USA? Broadly speaking, the Atlantic Ocean, specifically the common language, and the fact that we always, both sides, took the extra time to try and understand each other. Dreadnought, does the US LCS program have any hopes, or are they going to be a dead end? I think this being preordained, they're now a dead end, but you see, what's bringing us... The LCS at its heart is trying to bring a Stanflex style system into American development. And the problem for that was there is a working system which works quite well, but the American procurement system as it is in peacetime will not create that. So that's the problem. You had always the whole point of it was Stanflex was looking over your shoulder going, look at what I do. And the Americans going, we're trying to go bigger and better than you. But I work. Actually, 331. What was it just cost that killed the K-25 light cruisers that had the iron looked at, or was there more than that? Mostly cost. Mostly cost. You see, I have to admit, I was having an interesting conversation on Saturday night with someone. It was basically discussing whether it's polite or not to eat on YouTube videos. And I went, when you're planning on doing a 3-hour video and you haven't had lunch, your choice is to sit there with your stomach rumbling the whole time, drinking because you need to keep talking, and then probably end up running to the loo every 5 minutes because there's nothing in your body to contain the liquid. Or you can eat. I always usually go with the eating one. As far, is it true that HMS Vanguard was called a fully armored battlecruiser at some point, and why? It's not true. There is often this myth that goes around her, but she was always a fast battleship. But there are various jokes in Royal Navy departments at the time that a fast battleship is a fully armored battlecruiser. So that's where it comes from. Alfred B28. I personally think modern ships should have more gun powers. It seems to me in a long conflict, missiles could become scarce fairly easily. However, I could just be missing something. Thoughts? That's pretty much what Bill Trump seems to have concluded. We do keep going over this point and trying to figure out a way around it. But honestly, I'm not sure what just happened on my screen. But there was a weird bar which just went across my screen. I have no idea why. As it is, I'll put that there so I can watch that screen. And anything weird happens, tell me. And when I say weird, I mean more weird than a poodle currently running up and down my garden like a mad thing going, where are the squirrels? It's always a pleasure, Dreadnought. So it looks like with the growing chip shortage and auto manufacturers already starting to return to mechanical fuel tanks to ensure they can deliver products, how are navies squaring this circle? About the same, really. About the same. Although there are various ones who will try and claim they are doing something more intelligent and innovative, etc. But in the end, it's probably going to be about the same. I have finished the chicken sattés. They were nice. I don't normally get them, but they were nice. Now, it's the same solutions that the civilian market is seeking out. The military market is already seeking out as well. Mostly, the sensible ones. The unsensible ones are believing that they can keep on with sources. Okay. Thank you, Money640. Yeah, eat, enjoy. I don't know. I don't care. Thank you. I think most people don't care. The people who do care, well, again, I've had this conversation with people on Twitter. I engage with everyone like I do normally, so you never get the whole fake, I'm going to be nice or pretend to be something I'm not. You always get the very blunt, honest Alex. Mainly because I don't have the energy to be anything else. And I don't have the honestly, my brain, as good as it is at some things, is not good enough at being at trying to promote a false persona. So yes, if you ever wonder what I'm like, and I hope the people who've met me in Canada, etc., will back this up, I am the same person in real life as I am on screen. Maybe with less books around me. And that's because very few people meet me in my office. Was the conversation about food or drag? No, it was actually with a potential YouTuber. If she starts her YouTube channel, I'll be very happily pointing you in her direction. But Guy 229, do you ever see a modern version of battleships ever being built again? And not necessarily an all big gun ship, maybe more like the Kirov class with trouble armor. The Kirov class actually have very little armor on them, which is why battle cruiser probably fits as much as anything. Because they've only got armor around their magazines, and I think it's about 70mm thick. So yeah, it's one of those things. It depends on how things develop. Honestly, it does depend on how the world develops, and if you do start to see bigger ships coming back, then that could mean some development along those lines. And it's here in 96831. Isn't the Atlanta class the US equivalent to the K-25 the UK had? Wouldn't the 5.25 inch 50 gun cal shortage be a factor in K-25 cruiser proposal being cancelled? Not really. Let me explain this. Under a war scenario, you are limited only by how much money you're willing to spend. Because, yes, there is a shortage in the 5.25 inch guns. But if you are prepared to allocate the money, you do so. But if you think the money is better allocated to other things, you don't. Because in a war scenario, it's not a case of do we feel like it or not. It's a case of all this stuff is useful, which do we think is most useful? So it's ultimately an economic decision. But to Fox, with the lethality of modern missiles and large trucks that are being built up, is there an assumption today that both sides will run out of ships before they run out of missiles? I don't think so, because it turns out the stocks aren't as big as you'd presume they are. And there's also the limitation of how many missiles are you going to need to fire to take a set head on a heavily armed target? You know, a carrier battle group is going to require a lot more missiles than they got on a single ship. Exponentially more missiles. Come, Gasberg. Read the nuclear plan cruisers. Given the Sejong the Great duties of Republic of Korea, I see bigger than Type 055 coming. Oh, yeah. I do. But it'll be interesting to see if they do go with nuclear-powered behemoths. If they do, that's really a global reach mechanism. And that also could be a nice stepping stone to nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. We have talked about the Type 004 carrier on bilge pumps. How the Type 003 is a stepping up to it. Well, producing a nuclear-powered surface ship would be a good way to stepping up to a nuclear-powered carrier. Sorry, didn't realize quite how big that was. Would I be right that Canada couldn't operate an animal class? Probably not. They could have done if they'd been prepared to devote most of their budget to it, but they've had to expand their navy and their budget to support it. Alpha B228. Is there a reason modern naval gun turrets are single mounts and not dual? Is it complexity or navals being cheap? Mostly it's the latter. Okay, in peacetime, wars of choice, and on the D scenarios, then you can go with the most efficient to maintain scenario, which is a single gun turret. Once you start to really think about war, then it becomes more efficient to have multi-gun turrets. And this is I had a locksmith try to explain how he wasn't being rude when I called earlier, when he let me know he had customers in his shop when I began to get a little long-winded. I don't know and get why some people get upset at things. Blunt and being to the point is just better. It's easier. Sage, I'm stiffing here, stuffing my hodge on the Sunday, even listening to you, so I don't see why you shouldn't have a CLT as well. Thank you. Concurrent, less books. Sacrilege, we must ensure the doc only meets for the British Library and Q archives. The library's always fun to meet people at. How daft is the idea that Canada, India, Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand each get a renown? Not daft, that's actually more possible than them having an Admiral class. A renown's a lot easier to maintain than an Admiral class. So it'll be Falklands writ large, with missiles used up and aircraft having to resort to skip bombing and jump bombs. Remember that during Libya, both France and the UK ran short of weapons and ended up going back to conventional bombs. We've got the same happening going in Ukraine. You can burn up through the very fancy stuff very quickly. Listening to Drax Dry Dock today, it put me in mind of, and it reminded me of the American invasion of Korea. And, the period where might made right. The thing was, unlike the Japanese, the Koreans didn't give in. The Koreans just kept turning up with more and more troops. And yeah, the Americans had the tech, but it was a long way from home. And they were starting to get outnumbered and surrounded. And there is something to saying for fighting an enemy who just doesn't want to give in. If your enemy won't give in, then you will run out of resources. And that's the big problem for all sides. Are you building your stuff based on your supplies and your things based on your opponent actually giving in? Because that's then part of your war planning, is your opponent giving in. And if they just decide not to give in, you could end up running out of stuff. Like I think, do you see more stealth ships like the Zumwalts being built? The Zumwalts are kind of late to the party, let's be honest. There were lots of navies already with stealth ships being built long before the Zumwalts came into service. There's the Type 45s, there's the Horizon class frigates, there's all sorts of things going around. So, honestly, there's going to be tons built. Are they going to be built with necessarily that configuration of hull and bow? I'm not sure, but we'll see it. It'll be interesting to watch out for. Hello, Frank Spello. Cameras, single or multi-gun turrets. For larger calibers, maybe selective ammo capability is harder to cram into multi-barrel turrets. Not really. It's a case of yes and no. You wouldn't put it in the same size turret you've got a single barrel in, but the turret actually wouldn't expand that much in overall square footage. Or weight, probably. Because most of the complexity of that is more to do with its coordination systems rather than anything else. Hello, what is going on with shipping? Hello, Sal. How you doing? Thank you for your kind notes. Did you have fun in Tankfest? Yes, I did have fun in Tankfest, and hope you're all well. Let's hear why didn't the Canadians and Kiwis order a battle class? Honestly, they didn't need them. It's kind of the case of the Canadians and Kiwis were building enough of what they had on other things, and they didn't need the battle class. Ghoststrauss, will you ever have a naval history panel? You can have multiple people on screen, like the Brady Bunch opening. Yes, I know about the Trumps. It's honestly something I need to look into and think about doing, and I do need to realize, especially if it ends up with one of the universities I'm working with, which is mucking me around quite so much in pay. If I end up having to leave them, I'm going to need to increase my YouTube income something, because that's the only sort of independent income I have. Other universities might up hours, I might get another lecturing post, but all those things are under the control of other people. The only one where I can really do everything myself, barring of course subscribe and watch it, but I can try and make it as good as I can, would be that is the YouTube channel. So I would need to think about it, but I haven't done that, because I see a lot of other people doing that, and I see how well they're doing, and I kind of worry, especially trying to do it through a laptop, it would break the laptop. So it's one of those things I have in mind for once I have a tower set up and I have the processing power that a tower brings with it, and specifically the RAM a tower brings with it. The fluffy research assistants are currently having a debate. Zebedee is contesting that kebabs are better than Chinese. Raleigh is contesting that pizza is best of all. For those who don't know, Zebedee is Tafra, Raleigh is the fluffy research assistant. Zebedee is the trainee assistant, fluffy research assistant. He's still training. He comes up for his review soon, though. For all those who would like to submit questions for Zebedee's review panel, which will be conducted, it's scheduled for the end of August. So in last week of August, he's coming up for his review of whether or not he will get promoted to assistant fluffy research assistant. It will be, of course, with the two supervisors. So myself and my sister will be assessing him properly. His immediate superior, the the fluffy research assistant, will of course offer his words and his views. But we will be having properly in last week of August a proper upgrade ceremony and discussion as to whether or not he should be promoted to from trainee to assistant fluffy research assistant. Did I have fun at Tankfest? I had a lot of fun at Tankfest. I think this might be the last piece of chicken from my Hong Kong style chicken. Yes, all the rest in there is disgusting vegetation, which doesn't earn its place in my stomach. Terrible, terrible. Why are they putting so much vegetation in these things? Why are all these people committed to trying to make me stay alive? It's terrible. Right. This is not going to end well. I have food and I have two dogs racing around in the garden. This is not going to end well. Stafford, bonus points for chopsticks. I haven't been able to learn them. Stafford, if you told me this while we were meeting in Canada, I would have taught you the same way my dad taught me. He taught me the engineer's trick for how to use chopsticks, and he taught my mum, he taught me, he taught my sister. He spent ages in the Far East building ships. So that's where I learned to use chopsticks from my dad. Hello, gorgeous. Yeah. Tafra arrived. Checo was preparing properly for his upgrade ceremony and his, the full examination. And a report. Assuming the Washington Naval Treaty allows all signatories to pass out existing ships that otherwise be scrapped to other nations, as imbalanced as that is, who do you think gets what ship? No extra construction permitted besides what is historically built post Washington Naval Treaty. 2 Nelsons, 2 Colorados, Mutsu, and the France Italy can build their large ships if they can spare the funds. It's going to be an interesting question between India and various other places as to whether or not they get who gets what. What are you up to down there, Mighty Fluff? Hello, what are you up to? You trying to get my... You are the most industrious corgi I know. You're going, okay, I might be small, but I can clamber up there to get the chicken. To get to the chicken. Okay. I think probably, knowing the British, we parcel stuff off between Canada, Australia, and India. So I wouldn't be surprised if probably not the 12-inch battleships, but the 13.5s go get, and the 13.5 battle cruisers that are surviving get split off between Canada, Australia, and India, depending on which one they feel would be best for them. New Zealand probably gets a battle cruiser. Probably you find that Canada and India get a squadron of battleships each, or roughly thereabout, 4 or 5 battleships each. And the battle cruisers mostly get divided off between Australia and New Zealand, with Australia maybe getting 2 and New Zealand getting 1. Let's go. If there are 7 renowns in the British Empire Fleet of Model 2, how much trouble is the Axis Navy in? Let's put it this way. You have 5 more capital ships. They're decent-sized capital ships and they're fast capital ships. So 5 more renowns in service across the British Empire means that they have to take that into notification. They have to understand that and work that and deal with that. My own suspicion is that if Canada has a renown, there is significant enough force in the North Atlantic that probably Deutschland gets cornered, kind of like Graf Spee does. In which case, you get into trouble there. You also might have had a significantly more capital ships present in Norway, which might have meant, again, it has knock-on effects for everything, basically. Again, Glorious might not be sailing on her own. She might be sailing with a renowned type. Who knows? In which case, again, Sharnos and Eisenhower, we know what happens when renown's there. So if Glorious is sailing with a renowned type, the odds are, does the same happen? But guys, do you see the USN building more smaller frigate-type ships in the future compared to destroyers and cruisers? And what is his opinion of that if they do? I think it's going to depend on how the Constellation class works out. And I think the problem is with smaller ships is that it works fine on paper until you realize that it's kind of like aircraft carriers. You need a certain amount of engine space, you need a certain amount of all these things to move your ship. But their percentages go up as a percentage of the hull, go up a lot less as the ship gets bigger. It's the same with the amount of VLS and missiles you can carry. The bigger ship can carry a lot more. So it's magazine depth, it's engagement, a number of engagements your ship can do if you have a larger ship. So it will depend on development of power generation and laser systems, pretty much. If lasers develop to the point you can trust your entire air defense to lasers, and you don't need to worry about having guns, etc., and all your missiles are there for just for offensive tools, then yes, you could have quite frigate-sized ships be your whole force. If that's not the scenario you end up with, then it's not going to be. If the Victory was sunk into the trench with Sammy Roberts, how long could she last for? Without knowing the exact bacteria and ratios down on the salinity and things operating at that level, the Sammy Roberts, I can't answer that question really. Even then, it would be an estimation. But let's put it this way: if she'd been sunk in 1805 in that same spot as the Sammy Roberts is, I doubt she'd be with us. Albert B228. How stuffed would merchant shipping be if global war kicked off? I mean, I remember hearing that the convoy test US ended. Only the Ticonderoga class had the range it needed. In the nicest way, if a global war clicks off, we have a lot of problems very quickly. You only have to see the impact of what is in fact quite a large, but also at the same time rather predictable decrease in the world supply of wheat, etc., has had an impact on the global economy. Remember the Evergreen tanker blocking up the Suez Canal and all those things. Yeah, the world is not designed for disruption in trade. It's just not. Next one, Dodge C. What do you expect to see if Glorious is found? A lot of holes. Budguy8829. Assuming the US builds and is willing to sell its 6th generation fighter close allies, see the UK wanting to buy some, or do you see them being happy with the just F-35Bs? You can only operate F-35Bs from our carriers. And currently we're committed to Tempest for our Royal Air Force fighter. Now, what happens with the Tempest program as time goes on, who knows? Does it get joined into the American program? Does it become joined with the European program? Does it continue as a solo? We don't know. So it's all up for the grabs. So honestly, no idea. If there was a movie about Eric Brown, the pilot who flew over a plane, what would their music? I think it would be the theme music. I'm not sure. But unfortunately, I think the person who I'd want to actually compose it is just about to retire after his last movie. Nice to get everyone. Did you see my rambling on the video earlier this week? To go to war on how to go to war with what you have applies in the Hearts of Iron against all odds Falklands campaign known as Operation Dire Spring. At this rate, I think I'm going to actually have to start seriously reading Hearts of Iron because the amount of questions I'm getting on it, mainly from you, but also from other people, and actually have an in-depth examination of it. It can end up being a Christmas special. Nice one. Possible tap review uterus, and why do you try to chew on chairs? That is definitely a question up for the possible review. We have been considering inviting an independent academic to come and chair the review. Of course, that's always appropriate if you're doing a full upgrade. And yes, so it might be chaired by the professor of the home, known as Mum. But 8829, besides the SSBN's next war, do you see the submarine having a bigger impact or the same as it did in World Wars? Probably going to be the same. It's hard to have a bigger impact than it did in World War One. It very nearly won the war for the Germans in World War One. In World War Two, things came close, but never quite as close as they did in World War One because of basically the convoy system and various other things. So it's hard to see how it can have a bigger impact. And we'd all hope the SSBN wouldn't have an impact in any world war. I'm not sure how they do it, but we hope they'd stay conventional because, as I often tell people when they say, well, what about if you use ICBMs against aircraft carriers? Great. The moment you fire one, you've let off the lid for firing any of them. But, it's nice. It's always fun to consider. Mainly from the point of view, if you don't consider these things, you then get caught unawares if any of them happen. Why I always worry when people speak in absolutes. I don't like it. Absolutes say absolute certainty what's going to happen. No one can be 100% sure. Another report, which side of Moscow are lost in the present war? Her sister's coming up for retirement within the next 4 to 5 years. Would the Russians be looking to beg, borrow, steal Ukrainian completer? I don't think so. That ship is way too old and has been sitting doing nothing for way too long and barely, if at all, maintained. No, the Russians they're as discussed in the long patrol video and in the live. The Russian shipbuilding is in a bit of a mess at the moment. It'll be interesting to see how they fix it. Secretary of Everyone, would I be right that British carriers would launch their strike sooner thanks to airbags? So they wouldn't get caught up by wind dying down on May 25th when the Argentinians tried to over their carrier. Again, I presume you're going to Hearts of Iron, and I actually have read something of this one. And I would say, in theory, you're right. But in practice, the world doesn't always work out that way. So in theory, you should be right. But there are always problems, and no system is ever perfect. For starters, any system that involves humans is guaranteed to not be perfect. Mm-hmm. Now my hands are clean. Food's finished. Recharging iron brew. Let's open up another book. What is the most ridiculous old history you know? Oh, good lord, there are so many. Let's see. The first one, let's see. Did warships ever have vending machines on board, even the IGN? Vending machines. I think there have been some experimentations with having vending machines on them more recently. And I think there are some ships in modern ships which have vending machines on them. I seem to remember being on something and seeing one. But it's rare. Mostly because you don't usually want to start charging your crew money on the ship. But, if you have it, you have a naffy or something, you can watch what's been going on. Whereas it's a vending machine, what's the vending machine going to sell? And that takes stuff away from the Navy and the Royal Navy and all sorts of things. It's a complicated scenario, basically. I like cascading. Thank you. Well, I'll have a look at those things. Right. So, quickly to go on this one, the Great Naval Battles of the Pacific War. This is, as I understand it, these are the following narratives are drawn exclusively from Naval Staff History Battle Summaries 23, 28, 40, 45, and 46. It has not been possible to reproduce all the diagrams found in those studies, nor all the appendices, most of the latter being orders of battle which are freely available on the internet. Some of the references have also been omitted as they have no modern traceable equivalents. Readers will observe a degree of inconsistency across the 5 documents, indicating they were written by different authors at different dates. A plate section and index not with the original summaries have been added. And this is the thing. This book is the Admiralty's description of the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Battle of the Java Sea, the Battle of Midway, the campaign of the Guadalcanal, and the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And seeing as you always love this one, Vice Admiral Kurita, with the Japanese Second Fleet, had pursued his way to San Bernardino Strait, undeterred by his losses during the day-long air attacks to the 24th by the Third Fleet fast carriers. Indeed, he had come through well considering his total lack of air cover. His presence in the Sibian Sea on the 24th and possible approach to San Bernardino Strait was known to the escort carriers of the Seventh Fleet, operating under Rear Admiral T.L. Sprague, east of Samar, in support of the landings on Leyte. These forces, which formed Task Group 77.4, belonged to the Pacific Fleet and had been temporarily transferred to the 7th Fleet. They consisted of 18 escort carriers organised in 3 groups of 6, each with a screen of 7 or 8 destroyers or destroyer escorts. In the northernmost station, east of Samar, was Task Unit 77.4.3. The Rear Admiral CAF Sprague, consisting of the escort carriers Fanshawe Bay, his flagship, St. Lo, Callan Bay, White Plains, and Kitcon Bay, which was under command of Rear Admiral Osty, Gambier Bay, destroyers Hull, Johnston, Heerman, and destroyer escorts S.B. Roberts, Dennis, Butler, and Raymond. At daylight, some of their aircraft were already in the air, carrying out the primary mission of the task unit to provide direct support for the landing operations of the 1st Cavalry Division and 24th Infantry Division on North Leyte. In addition, the unit was responsible for providing combat air patrol for the northern transport and objective areas, providing a part of the anti-submarine patrol for the transport area, providing their own combat air and anti-submarine patrols for the local defense of their own ships against submarine air attacks. Direct contact with units of the Japanese fleet was not expected. In view of the possible approach of enemy forces to San Bernardino Strait, Rear Admiral C.F. Sprague, Commander Task Unit 77.4.3, who was in the northernmost position on the night of the 25th October, had been enjoined to be ready to load torpedoes on short notice and be prepared to attack enemy air forces directed. But he had been given no responsibility for covering the exit of San Bernardino Strait, and he assumed his northern flank could not be exposed without ample warning. His immediate superior, Rear Admiral T.L. Sprague, had not been sent the Commander Third Fleet signal 2024 stating that he was going north, nor the Independence aircraft sighting report of 2000 hours showing the Japanese center force at the time and position which indicated that it picked up considerable speed and intended to sortie through San Bernardino Strait. Nor, so far as known, these messages were relayed to him by Vice Admiral Kincaid. Consequently, he made no changes in the night disposition of his escort carriers, the northernmost group of which was close to the edge of the circle, which the center force could reach by dawn. Vice Admiral Kincaid, for his part, assumed that the Third Fleet was in position to intercept and destroy any enemy who might force the San Bernardino Strait. This is a really interesting book to read on that front. And as said, this is the one, if you're looking for a book to start off your research from, this is a good one to start off with, because it's basically got, whilst not primary sources, what I would call, in that they are not directly present. These are sources which are official government sources from the time, written up by people who know what they're talking about from the official information provided. So they are as close to primary as you can't. I'm tempted to classify them as pertinent sources. Mm-hmm. Alfred B228. It would seem to me that if you want a ship that could defeat a convoy, nuclear-powered destroyer cruiser would be a good idea. Yes. I'm fairly sure if you start seeing nuclear-powered surface ships go on, they'll be called cruisers. Just differentiate them from the other ships. No one's going to go nuclear-powered destroyer. They're going to go, oh, we got destroyers and frigates, and we got these nuclear-powered cruisers. I was going to say, everyone, how plausible is an AM version of the Sea Dart for the Vickers submarine Type 583? The Sea Dart is not really a weapon I would like to try and convert into an air-to-air missile. There are many others I would configure on. I would probably go for a Phoenix before I would go for an air-to-air version of the Sea Dart. Strong thanks. Yeah, the battleship New Jersey had vending machines. Profits went to the unit fund for the other crew perks. That's right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's usually what they sort of use. The British tend to have nappy, but I did think the Americans had vending machines. Dan Freeman, hi Dan. How good would a secret history written close to the event be that included things like Ultra, even if it placed on the 60 years rules? It'd be useful. It's always useful. Frank Stoddard, don't see. What is the most surprising thing to you about Balsamar? Okay. When I first read about the Battle of Samar, when I was a very young boy, and I was still going through the phase of believing that everyone followed procedure and everyone in the military just was sort of, had all these rules and they followed them and they kept them and they wouldn't do wrong. Couldn't understand how the communications had been mucked up. But now I'm older, the thing I find so surprising about Samar is that a force which really wasn't structured around what it did, managed to do what it did. And it shows the quality of the individuals involved. Yes, the USN has done nuclear-powered destroyers in the past. I do realize this, but I think today, if you were doing a nuclear-powered surface ship, if you were calling a destroyer a frigate, people would look at you really funny. They look funny at you over the Zumwalt class enough for calling that a destroyer. If you were doing a nuclear-powered ship, they would look at you really funny. Frank Spanner. Daka. Frank, I did answer. I answered the vending machines one. Frank Spanner. I've missed a question, I think, somewhere, because I think there must have been a question about the USA and the USA. George Newman, you do realise your USA remaining in the UK is an old history question requiring the rewriting of 250 years of history. It's not I'm not answering it, it's just I haven't seen it. I'm not sure where it was, but it must have disappeared somewhere. You're tempted to call them what type of source? Well, I'm tempted to call them pertinent sources. Hello? Is there a reason you're hanging around out? Oh, assistant? Assistant? Could you do me a favour? Just in case a Fluffy comes running out, should that be in the bin? Because a little Fluffy, if he came out here, might be highly interested in that. So I think it should be in the bin, but I can't leave him. Thank you. Very kind of you.
What's your last slave, Dial?
I haven't quite trained this poodle to do what the last poodle did. It's terrible. You're getting there, Fluffy Research Assistant. You are. There. Once you can get over to the bin runs, you then become the Fluffy Researcher. I'm not sure if your little brother will ever be able to quite do that. No, we'll see. USS Bainbridge, fun times. And overall, considering the USN decommissioned these disposed of all their nuclear-powered guided missile cruisers following the Cold War on cost grounds, would nations really look at such ships unless the current war or something along those lines ends up in the explicit Cold War? Let's put it this way. They got rid of them on cost grounds because they no longer had to have them because they didn't have an opponent who had them. It's kind of like the same thing happened with battleships, remember? The reason battleships weren't built anymore wasn't because they were gone away with and no one could see their need or justify them. It was because no one was building them, so you didn't need your own ones. But if, as I said, if China built some, just because they felt like they could, and especially as a way to step up their nuclear surface ship propulsion before they put it into a carrier, it would seem a very sensible evolutionary idea and what they would normally do, then I can't see America not having to answer that. Shomak, it's interesting to see the blame for Samal being over a breakdown in communications rather than putting blame on one person. It would be more normal for it to be a breakdown in communications than being one person not doing their job. Let's be honest, communications more often not do break down. Even when everyone's doing their best and trying their hardest, communications break down, often because people are doing their best and trying their hardest, and therefore they're thinking about a bazillion things, and the basic things get dropped and forgotten. What's this? Oh, yeah. That's good, that's arrived. Mm-hmm. Jordan, Frank Swallow, I was supposed to pose a similar question I'd like to see in the Dragon. The old tips and never got an answer either. I'm still not quite sure what the question is. Next one. If Spain had a choice between USN Independence class and RN Central class, what are the pros and cons of each, and would the Independence class still win? It's half a dozen and one, 6 of the other. Knowing the Spanish, they go with the Central class. Now, there's a reason for that. Going for Independence class might seem sensible, and they probably would go with there's part of me which says they would go with the Independence class. But going with the Central class if they're actually have got a competition between the two, rather than just looking at the independence class, not actually doing competition, Central class probably wins because of the closeness of the supplies, and because they might think they have more of a chance of being able to get supplies off Britain and America if America's feeling antsy, because especially post World War II, they're probably looking at going America's roaring as strong and able to be assertive, whereas Britain's rebuilding itself. Andrew, Frank Fasano's question. Hello. Okay, thank you for that. Let's see. If the USA remains part of the UK, how much bigger is the RN? Massive. Okay, if the USA is part of the UK to this day, for starters, probably Canada is as well, because whatever you've done that keeps the USA past the UK, Canada would probably stay as well. In which case, you've got an entire North Atlantic nation that's probably at some point in its history swallowed up Greenland and Iceland as well. I'm sorry, Denmark, but they probably would have done, and I'm sorry, Iceland, but they probably would have done. Because if you've got that sort of larger nation sitting across the both sides of the Atlantic, then the things in the middle are going to get swallowed up. Especially in the period you're talking about. If you're talking about through the 1800s, hello, Zebzeb, and into the early 1900s, especially in the period when might makes right, these things would probably have happened. And if they've managed to stay, they'll have stayed. So that's sort of the interesting scenario you're dealing with. You are probably dealing with a far, far larger RN. Figure something a little bit bigger than the current US Navy. Because you would need quite... Oh! Sorry, I think I've got to go save a bow. Because a fluffy research assistant's bow's come off, and a trainee assistant fluffy research assistant appears to be trying to eat it. Hello, 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 you're cute, you're cute, you're cute. I got it. Hello. Bow saved. Every time he goes to get his hairdressers, he comes back with a different bow on. And he keeps on for as long as he can, and then when it gets off, he just gets very down about it. We always have to save it. But no, you're probably dealing with well, let's see. It depends what else has been managed to be retained, but you're honestly dealing with something which probably has roughly is formed up around 12 carrier battle groups. Because you need about that many you need about 6 in the Pacific for the commitments out there, and you need about 6 in the Atlantic. You're dealing with a truly tremendously large nation. A tremendously large nation, and that is just the sheer industrial might you're dealing with, and the number of people and the economic power you're dealing with would dwarf pretty much everything. I mean, they'd just be. And then there's the whole Ireland question. Would Ireland have managed to go independent without? Oh, would Ireland have been allowed to go independent? There is just 250 years of history. That is a whole video of working it out and doing a lot of maths. But guys, besides the Battle Atlantic, what was the deadliest naval battle in World War II? Do you include the Arctic convoys in the Battle Atlantic? Because that's one of the options. And then you have, of course, the whole Pacific campaign of the American submarines, which is just massively deadly for the Japanese. And then there's the convoy battles in the Battle of Mediterranean. Honestly, once you get below the Battle Atlantic, besides the Battle Atlantic, what was deadly battle, there is not much to pick from in all of them. They all are very, very nasty. Well, Halsey did fail to let other commanders know exactly what he's doing. Wait, I mean BT. Halsey, BT. Yeah, look. Yes, but the trouble is, to an extent, in Halsey's defense, I would say he expected the other commanders to also be communicating. There's not just him failing to communicate, there's lots of commanders failing to communicate. I'm presuming they're communicating. So it's a breakdown in communication because everyone's so busy doing the things they're already doing, they're not realizing what else is going on around them. You almost need a staff officer whose job is to maintain track on what and communicate with other forces exactly what you are doing and maintain track on what they're doing so they can tell the commander exactly what your neighbors are doing when they need to know it. And exactly at that point will be the time which the staff officer should stand up and go, sir, we've just received this signal about this, and this. And we think this is going on. And yeah. And go, oh, well, what would you do then if I was the night before the Battle of Samar? I would probably condense down my escorts and move them south. My escort carriers. And I would leave something up north to spot and see if the Japanese were coming through, with orders to immediately withdraw behind smoke if they did come through. And then I would mass launch from my 18 escort carriers every single aircraft I had available to do an attack. Well, in the next decade or so, is it fairly likely that the current trend of nuclear or number of navies acquiring amphibious assault ships, helicopter carriers continues to the point it becomes par, but of course, some medium-sized navies to have a few of them, with large navies operating full carrier? If so, that would affect the balance of naval ocean quite a bit compared to today. Yeah, I think it's probably likely, especially as those LHDs, etc., are going to retain significant drone capability, etc. They're probably going to be fairly useful assets for middle ranking powers and powers seeking to be middle ranking to acquire. I know Atlantic really would be the UK's lake. Well, North Atlantic definitely. The South Atlantic would be a subsidiary of the North Atlantic Lake. Thank you, George. Why in 1963? Why couldn't the US independence be given ski jumps? As it seems, the Spanish carrier would benefit. To be fair, it's to do with. I seem to remember it's a framing issue, and it's the way they framed out the hull and the forward part of the flight deck. But I'm not 100% sure. I would have to look at the detailed designs to work that one out. Oh, look, how the fluffy research assistant's ears? Well, that's the reason why he didn't go on the walk with me today. His ears are still having to get better. The Taffra has got a bad leg. He's managed to scratch his leg, but the fluffy research assistant, your ears are getting better, aren't they? They're getting better.
Last day of meds today.
Yeah, it's last day of meds today. His bow's come off him.
Where?
I saved it.
Excellent. I'm not surprised because they both have been after it for days.
Yes, I know.
It's almost as if Riley wanted it off.
Mm-hmm. Or it was a game.
It was a game.
Thank you, Frank Swallow. And thanks for letting me know the question. The various people, George Newman and Anna Rapal, thank you. I should actually consider probably making some more people what are they called? What Sean and Dan and etc. are admins, but we'll get to that. We'll see if the channel continues to grow at the rate it's been growing. I probably do need to start making another couple of people admins. I'm thinking about that. Yeah, that's one side. Just because sometimes the questions come in very fast. Wonderful. I would absolutely hate to be Turbits or Raider if this scenario, USA staying with the British Empire, happened. Alternatively, just trying to be a British ally rather than a challenger. Honestly, if that happens, well, imagine if you combine the British industrial shipbuilding might with the American industrial shipbuilding might and spread across the technology the way you would as a single nation in the dreadnought race in World War One and run up to World War One. Just imagine how many dreadnoughts would appear and what size they'd be. And also, if you've got America and UK as part of one nation, then I'm sorry, you probably don't end up the Washington Naval Treaty or the London Naval Treaties, in which case Britain's building its fleet unencumbered by treaties and responding to events in the traditional manner it normally has done, which means at which point if World War II happens the way it happened, if those wars, and I don't see those wars really happening the same way in that scenario. Yeah, it's just not gonna. It's gonna be massive. Can we just imagine what a combined Canada, North America, UK, Denmark, Canada, North America, UK, Greenland, probably Ireland, Iceland economy would be in terms of those nations being combined into one nation? Can we just imagine how big that economy would be and how much of that would adopt? Also, imagine the national health system for that nation. Just how big it would have to be to sustain and look at it all. Goodness gracious me. Be colossal. So, Don Freeman, aren't the role you're describing one of the most vital roles of leader staff anyway? Yes, but the trouble is you need to have officers who are either going to take on the role. The trouble is when you have a staff, unless you have an officer who's exactly dedicated for that role as part of their functions, all those officers will be used doing other things, especially when you're conducting operations. And if you look through the staff role list from NATO and the stars, etc., there are officers for whom that function could well fall within their purview, but there's no one who's specifically for it. And I would really like that beyond to be someone who's specifically for it. Basically, like you have an intelligence officer to look over all the briefs about what the enemy are, you almost need someone who's the reverse of that, who's who's not your operations officer, because that's looking after your operations in the staff, but an allied officer or a fleet officer or something like that with that rank of that title, and going, this is what the rest of the fleet's doing. First of all, let's see. Why no CSN subs at San Van Indian Street? No idea. Probably because they're busy doing other things. That's often the reality. There's only a finite number of subs available. You'd like to have them everywhere you want them, but there's going to be everywhere you want them, and there's going to be the number of subs you have available, and that's always going to be a smaller number than that. And look, a real old history question. One, would UK allow US to industrialize after its Federal Revolution? Yeah. It'd be very difficult for the UK to stop it industrializing. A, and B, it would actually be helpful to industrialize it because it would allow you to organize it. And the only way you're going to retain it as a single nation is if you combine it into the UK as part of the British nation. So expect a very much expanded House of Commons and House of Lords. So when Westminster Parliament is rebuilt, it will be truly colossal. You might actually achieve a third chamber scenario. You might end up with a three chamber parliament because it'd be that big. Judging, right. Who would fund Irish revolt without Americans sending money to Old Sod? There's all sorts of interesting things there. George Newman, if the US was still part of the UK, Ireland would need a fleet somewhere near USN, RN, Alsyon combined current size combined fleets. Yeah, and could probably afford it. If the USA had, say, part of the UK, to the end of the transatlantic slave trade would be a century early, and possibly a less developed Australia as American prison colony would be still being used. Well, America wasn't really used as a prison colony. That was more Australia. But the thing is, you're forgetting there's the other reverse, that you might have used Australia as a place to deposit some of the American leaders who are even more annoying. So you're thinking that of Australia just as a prison colony for the UK. Might well be. But it also might be a prison colony where you send Americans. Mm-hmm. Think of that as an advantage. So just think. Suddenly, Australia becomes the place where you deposit annoying Americans, probably annoying Irish, and annoying British. So actually, that could see Australia develop even quicker. Although it could also be in far more male orientated than it has been, than even it was previously. Because let's be honest, the problem when developing Australia, which they found out really quickly, is that using a penal colony to develop it, is it was incredibly. There are lots of guys going around here. How there's a small problem with developing Australia when there's just guys. There are only guys. We can only see guys. Mm-hmm. Also, new question. What makes a ship handy or nimble versus one that isn't? Reading Freeman and similar circumstances seem to have a desired trait for cruisers. Usually it's their maneuverability, which can. Basically, the factors you're thinking about in terms of maneuverability are engine power and ability to modify and modulate the engine, which is why the multi-shaft system really is useful. Rudder, but also length to beam ratio in terms of how does that affect your turning circle and how rapidly you respond to response to instructions. Andrew Paul, one would hope not. But again, who knows what would have a man's head? There's also the question of that without World War One ever happening, does someone like Hitler even rise to power? What was that? Hang on, I think it's skipped up. It's rather quickly. Would Adolf have pushed his luck if the USA was still in the Empire? Oh, who knows? Adolf is a bit of an interesting gentleman. Malagar, Dreadnought Race. You seriously think that Jones would even try racing against a combined Anglosphere? There's this fella called Kaiser Wilhelm and another fella called Tirpitz, neither of which are known for their long-term ability to strategically understand infrastructure. So, yeah, they probably still do a race. George Newman, that was what worried me when I first posed a question several months ago, which basically was, if Britain had been a little less heavy-handed in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 70s, would US rebel? That's a $64 billion question. $1 trillion question, probably. I mean, opposite of intelligence, too many jokes possible. Well, they would be called the obvious officer. They've gone. Hi, Doc. If the South Atlantic became the RN's South Atlantic RN's playground, the Falklands would be being the second scalp afloat, more than likely. I sorry, wasn't sure if I'd asked before. Why was everyone surprised when the hood blew up? Because it was the pride of the Royal Navy, and everyone had conveniently forgotten it was a battle cruiser. Night Secretary, in a dogfights episode about Operation Rhine, Lieutenant Commander from the Prince Jürgen said seeing the explosion thought nobody on Hood had survived. That doesn't surprise me. Machinist First Row Bismarck said they were horrified at the devastation from the explosion because no one ever thinks the ships they're firing are going to blow up for some reason. I have no idea why, but they don't. Britain letting Empire retaining North American industrialized. This is not an organized process. It was all part of a laissez-faire model, wasn't it? Probably. But also remember, there's going to be the advantage of America having direct access to British funding and British investment, i.e., through London, which is the most advanced, which is the banking network. Which, well, there's this classic thing that in order to buy Louisiana from the French, which was the money Napoleon was using to finance the invasion of the UK, the Americans had to get a loan from a British bank. So, A, they wouldn't have had to make the Louisiana purchase because they'd probably been won in war anyway. And B, and this is the important point, you probably end up with a scenario where actually almost America industrializes more quickly because they have access to the financial markets in London more easily and under the same legal network. And if you're operating on the same legal framework, people are more likely to lend money because, well, they have the same recourse in judicial action. So therefore, they feel more secure lending money. I'm leaving that to you, Dan. I feel that's more a medical question about problems with developing a penal colony. I think that's definitely a medical question for you to deal with. Let's let's see. In Alt USA, does Panama Canal still get built? What role does Teddy Roosevelt have in your super navy? Alt USA probably does get built, and let's be honest, Teddy Roosevelt will be the greatest prime minister Britain has never had. Because I can imagine Teddy Roosevelt, if he brought on that scenario, being an ardent monarchist, but I could also imagine him, and because he does like his history, etc., also still wanting, liking having a supersized navy, and goodness knows what a Prime Minister Roosevelt and a Prime Minister Roosevelt would make of the Royal Navy, but I'm fairly sure it'd be absolutely colossal. And then, of course, Lord Roosevelt, after he retires from the Navy, after he retires from being Prime Minister, would have a wonderful time. Georgian, you also have USA entering World War I in 1914 and entering World War II in 1939, and you have everyone else going on oh sugar right after the declaration of war. Yeah. And look, if I recall correctly, Georgia was the penal colony before the revolution. Georgia was sort of a penal colony. It wasn't quite the same as Australia. Australia was a bit more obsessive in terms of work there. I did not study British political economy as much as I wanted because I could not retain my sanity going through a wall of Marxist literature. There are some good sources out there. There are some others which are written in the 1960s and some of these which are just weird. John, look, if the USA had say part of the empire, the Federalists would have gotten their way over fashion. Imperial Federation on its way to becoming one day a system as Commonwealth. Possibly. Karen, with a British North America, UK would have just split France and her empire with her 10 allies post Napoleon, setting up a much bigger Belgium to counterbalance Germany. There would have been all sorts of interesting things. So, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And his brother's around, but he hasn't popped out now yet. So, getting on to next books. Put this one to there. Balance. Bum, 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 bum. German destroyers of World War II. This cost me £8 at the lovely place that is known as Tankfest. And as a cool find, you missed a biscuit. Uh-huh. And good plans in there. A nice outline of Narvik. And it's well written. It's always interesting to read. This one was written by Gerhard Koop and Klaus-Peter Schmolke. Koop served in the Kriegsmarine in the Second World War and then in post-World War Federal German Navy until his retirement in 1981. Schmolke is one of the finest ship draftsmen in Germany. So you expect the plans and the things to be quite good, well drawn up. They are. There are some really, really interesting designs in here. Listen to this one. A fiasco occurred following the mine-laying operation on 12th December 1939. Z4, Richard Beitzen, Z8, Bruno Heinemann, Z14, Friedrich Inn, and Z15, Erich Sternbuck, and Z19, Hermann Kuhn, flag, sorted in two groups to lay 240 mines off the Tyne, after which they headed for rendezvous in the German Bight, with 3 light cruisers to escort them home. Heinemann had an engine malfunction and wallowed for an hour and a half in sight of the English coast, with Steinbrück standing by. 3 British aircraft, which arrived to investigate at 10:30 the following morning, were beaten off. At 17:30 hours on 12 December, Nuremberg, Leipzig, and Cologne had left Schelling roads for the northwest corner of the Westwall mine barrage. Vice Admiral Lütjens, who had replaced Vice Admiral Donch as BDA, CNC cruisers, on the 21st of October and was aboard Nuremberg, had orders from Mining Group West, Naval Command West, to rendezvous there with the 5 returning destroyers, about 11:30 hours on the morning of the 30th of December. The wind was variable, force 2 to 3, it was sea state 2, cloudy but with good visibility. And Nuremberg's and Leipzig's shipboard aircraft were catapulted up to fly anti-submarine escort. Since a light cruiser rates more highly than a destroyer, the logic of using 3 such warships to protect 5 destroyers seems incomprehensible. As stated by Lütjens in his report, though, the proper escort for a destroyer is a torpedo boat. Both torpedo boat flotillas were in the shipyard for refit or engine overhaul. Only Siedler and Jaguar were operational, and these were in the Baltic. The only destroyers operational in the entire Navy were the 5 engaged in the mine-laying operation, although it was hoped that 2 more would be repaired in time. Admiral Marshall, Fleet CNC, stated in his G Kidos B NR 29640 and Ang Tuzu I1 SKI 174540. That although it was clear for him from the outset that this operation that the presence of British submarines in the North Sea presented a risk to the cruisers, that risk was justified. Until then, British submarines had no successes, and in his opinion, it was preferable to have a cruiser torpedo now and again, rather than the destroyer crews gaining an impression the cruisers just lying at anchor while smaller units were thrown into action against all manner of superior forces without any support. Moreover, the morale of the cruiser crews suffered severely in the long run if they were always ready to do sail, but never received orders to do so. Thus, the drawbacks of this type of operation had to be accepted, there being no successful warfare without risk. Lütjens had investigated the Danish freighter Sharkov, sending suspicious radio codes, but he did not have her stopped and examined when he saw she was on the free list of neutrals. Shortly afterwards, a British aircraft began to shadow the cruisers. The 5 destroyers were sighted bearing northeast by German reconnaissance aircraft, the 3 cruisers with which they were to rendezvous being north of them and below the horizon. At 11:20 hours, their position was about 40 miles west-southwest of the cruisers, and Lütjens ordered the 3 cruisers to steer 240 degrees to meet the destroyers. 5 minutes later, Leipzig and Nuremberg received 1 torpedo each from a fan of 3, the third having missed the latter ship. 4 to 5 minutes after Nuremberg was hit, 3 more torpedo tracks were sighted astern of the cruiser, but the torpedoes exploded harmlessly on a seabed. Shortly afterwards, Nuremberg sighted a partially surfaced submarine directly astern about 5,000 yards off. The wireless monitoring section reported that the submarine was HMS Salmon, with 6 bow torpedo tubes. Following the hit, Nuremberg reduced speed to about 18 knots. Her fire control was out of commission, but her seaworthiness was not affected. Meanwhile, Leipzig had been left alone heading southeast, making 12 knots on her cruising diesel because all her boiler furnaces had been extinguished. Detonations and smoke had been observed aboard Hermann Kuhn and Friedrich Inn. The bearing was so far off the expected rendezvous point, however, that the FDS decided that the activity did not involve the cruisers and must be between aircraft and a submarine, and for this reason the destroyers did not approach. At signal 11:26, Nuremberg and Leipzig torpedoed grid square 3747. Had not been transmitted on all bands because of a defective aerial and simultaneous telegraphist error. The FDZ did not receive the signal since he had not tuned in on the long-wave close zone in accordance with standing instructions, for which he was later reprimanded. At 11:37, Lütjens requested the rendezvous through the Navy shortwave band. For the critical 10-minute period after the attack, complete confusion had reigned ashore. But even now, the destroyers remained unaware of what was amiss. Between 12:12 and 12:22, 3 Hampton bombers, possibly those beaten off 90 minutes or so earlier by Bruno Heimann, attacked Nuremberg, but without success. More than an hour after Nuremberg Leipzig had been torpedoed, the destroyers had still not affected the rendezvous, and as it seemed to Lutyens that a navigational problem existed, he decided to wireless the FDZ his position, course and speed, and a homing signal as from 12:45. He sent off the aircraft circling Leipzig to scout for the destroyers. However, the aircraft failed to establish contact because of the poor visibility. And it gets worse. It's a good book. Mm-hmm. If the Lexington means built like Hood, and the US standards sent to the breakers, yes. Hello. Well, probably the first generation of them. Hello. Hello. Mm-hmm. Hi, David Gordon. Hi, Doc. I have a small problem with you. Since discovering your channel 4 weeks ago, I now have 12 books on the RN World War II, trawler sloops, through the heavy cruisers, up to now. Sorry, it happens. It's what we do. We peddle books. And look, there are many who might agree with you in the UK. Okay. Jane, hello. Nice hearing. Do you listen to Ship Hits the Fan podcast? Not often enough. I occasionally have caught an episode, but not recently. Sadly enough. It's a good one. It is good. He is helping. Okay, you want to go help your sissy? Is this your banned book segment today? Not really, but it's nice to have a book about the German Navy written by Germans to read. I don't agree with everything in it. Some of the assessments of the Bruships they're fighting is obscenely sad. But yes, otherwise it's a very good book. And Paul, having a cruiser getting torpedoed now and again is good. Well, that happened quite a bit, didn't it? Lutzow, Prince Jürgen, Leipzig, Nuremberg, Kaldrich. There's always chances to torpedo destroy cruisers. That's right. Why wouldn't the captain of 1908 Essendon try to beach his ship on the North Keeling Island? Because he thought it was going to get captured. This is the thing, if he beaches a ship and it gets captured, it's far worse than him just losing a ship. Wait, the destroyers saw the cruisers being attacked and didn't come to assist? No, because they presumed they weren't their destroyers. They're cruisers. So, because they were in the wrong place. They basically saw fighting going on and didn't go and get involved. Most of these things are absolute messes for most of the navies. And let's be honest, most of the beginning of World War II is a mess for most navies involved in it. Then we have Big Guns in the Atlantic by Angus Konstam, which is I picked up in. I think I got this one in the Chalk Valley History Festival. Yes, I did. Which was fun. It was definitely worth going to, and this was an interesting book to find. And it's a Osprey book on what their sorties were and what their initial strategies were, which is really quite interesting. And in many ways, it's inspired me to, because I've looked at this, and I've then looked at some of the sources I have on the French and Italian cruiser strategies, and that's why there are lives coming up this week and next week on the French and Italian cruiser strategies. Just because I can do them. Gross Admiral Raider's commerce raiding plans were born out of necessity. A veteran of World War I, Raider had seen the naval superiority of Britain and her allies at first hand, so he understood that in the event of another war, his fleet would be hard-pressed to achieve anything of significance against so powerful an adversary. Besides, with the restrictions imposed on the Weimar Germany by the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was incapable of building capital ships worthy of that name. As a result, when he was promoted to admiral in 1928 and assumed command of the Reichsmarine, State Navy, Raeder began developing his own plans. Fortunately, during the early 1920s, he was involved in producing Germany's official history of naval war. He made a particular study of commerce raiding and became a leading expert on the subject. Inevitably, then, this would become the core of his new strategy for any future war with Britain. Raeder realized that unlike the coal-burning cruisers and armed merchant in the previous war, more modern commerce raiders would have a greater range and would no longer be dependent on a network of friendly overseas ports. In fact, if they were supported by tankers and supply ships and had the capability of refueling at sea, then they might well be able to conduct extensive cruises and so would have the potential of disrupting Britain's lifeline convoys. This, though, depended on the Navy obtaining suitable ships. To that end, Raeder began supervising plans to build a series of purpose-built commerce raiders. Their intended role had to be disguised, as the Versailles Treaty of 1919 prevented the building of armored warships displacing more than 10,000 tons, which could only be used as coastal defense vessels. There was no real political desire to rebuild the German Navy, but the Navy was allowed to replace its aging warships. Raeder used this to push through the building of a Panzerschiff, armored ship, a vessel which is essentially a custom-built commerce raider. Officially, Panzerschiff A was built to replace the pre-dreadnought battleship Prison, which had served as a coastal defense vessel and tender until being scrapped in 1931. However, this new ship was purpose-built to roam much further than Germany's territorial limits. Unusually for the time, she was powered by 8 diesel engines, driving a pair of propeller shafts and generating over 53,000 shaft horsepower. This gave the ship a top speed of 26 knots and a range of 18,650 nautical miles at 15 knots. She was no coal-burning person, though, having 4 times the range, much better armour, and considerably more firepower. More important, the Prussian had been obsolete even before the start of World War I. Panzer A, soon to be named the Deutschland, was a thoroughly modern warship designed for a new kind of war. I am sorry, but the moment you start saying something like, she has a top speed of 26 knots in the 1930s, I'm looking and going, this is a ship which you might be calling a commerce raider, but she's going to get caught. And it's because you're having to make compromises because of your industrial base. But it also means she is, unfortunately, a heavy cruiser. At best. Veteran, you brought books at Chalk Valley Army. You went to the bookshop and didn't tell me. I was waiting in the bookshop when you arrived, Dan. Nicest way. What do you think I've been doing in there? Just standing in the bookshop going, oh, these are pretty. If this was something other than books behind me, people would say I had a problem, or at least an addiction. As it is, because I'm a historian, and because they're books, people don't. Nice thing. What is it about H.S. Hood that draws people to her? She's big and beautiful. What else did I get? Oh, yes. I didn't just get that, though. I also got The Glorious 1st of June, 1794. There's another Osprey production book, and it's really quite cool. It's got some great drawings in it, and it's got some also maps of the battle, which is quite a good one because you basically see what the British force looks like and how it goes complete and utterly interesting. The glorious 1st of June. Oh, the convoys and escorts. The naval forces involved. Oh, just listen to them. So beautiful. Oh. There is Queen Charlotte, first-rate ship line, 100 guns, commanded by Sir Andrew Snape Douglas, Admiral Earl Howe Richard. with Sir Roger Curtis as flag captain aboard as well. Royal George under the command of Sir Alexander Hood and flag captain William Donnet. Royal Sovereign under the command of Henry Nichols, with Thomas Graves being the admiral aboard. Cuthbert Collingwood in charge of Balfour. Go away, Mosquito. You will find me far too much. Thank you. Far too much iron brew in my blood for your taste. Goodbye. Far, far too much iron brew. HMS Impregnable under command of George Blagden Westcott and Admiral Benjamin Caldwell. HMS Queen under command of John Hutt and Admiral Alan Gardner. You go down the list and you just look through all these officers and you just go, oh, it's so many cool officers. The glorious 1st of June. These are, of course, the 16th of May. This is sort of the fleet orders of battle in this period. And you just go through the campaign, builds up, and it takes you through the campaign. Then it takes you to... Oh, it's a gorgeous book. The Battle of the 28th of May, 29th of May, what they're doing, and then the glorious 1st of June itself. It is just a gorgeous book to read by Osprey. Osprey had put through something really beautiful. Another one I got, well, before Dan Freeman arrived. Well, sort of, Alex, to be fair, you are the sort of person I expect to find standing in the bookstore looking around saying, ooh, these are pretty. Yeah, that's very much, that is me. You know, there are problems out there. So, how would you categorize the US standards by generation? And is the podcast you've listened to one by the US company Rooster Teeth, as I listen to it myself? Potentially. I listen to quite a lot of podcasts. Honestly, I listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos when I'm in the gym and when I'm driving. Usually what I put on, because I have a low tolerance for most UK radio stations. I will wind up my colleagues whenever when we're in Canada with Canadian, well, we're actually no, with YouTube Music's Canadian country, but you know. Speaking of which, there are some songs on Canadian country which are so good I have copied and have kept as part of my playlist in the UK. There are others I have put into a second playlist which I put on when I want to annoy people who are in the car with me. I always have two playlists. The one you have for people you like and when you're enjoying yourself, and the one you have for winding other people up if they're in the car with you. That was quite big, what floated past me just then. Was that a moth? If that's heading for my computers, my books, that will be war. Okay. Generation. How would you categorize the US standards by generation? First generation are interesting. Second generation getting better. Third generation quite cute. So probably be the first generation you would find disappear if the Lexingtons had actually been built on the lines of a Hood and actually been built. Although there again, the more capital ships you have, which are in the 40,000 ton mark, which are being built, the less likely you are to to slap on the door and make the things go down to 30-something thousand tons. Because again, in the nicest way, with the Americans having the 16-inch ships they already did have in, and if they'd had if they also had some Lexingtons with 16-inch guns, the Royal Navy would probably be demanded to have completed a G3 or two. Which could have led to the remaining G3s being completed as carriers. So you could end up with the scenario where you have a pair of G3 carriers and a pair of G3 battle cruisers. There's a whole debate of whether or not of renown versus and repulse versus hood in terms of looks. I'm sorry, but I am of the favor of actually. I suppose Stafford has got it right. Renown and repulse are more like 74s, and that makes them sexy. Because let's be honest, the 74 is the workforce of the fleet. The 74 is what wins you wars. The first rate and second rate, they look cool, and you have a few of them running around, but the 74s are what win your wars. Good afternoon, Dr. Clarke. Just because you're a historian doesn't mean you don't have a book problem. Being a historian just gives you the justification for your addiction. Look, let's put it away. Historian doesn't have a book problem. They have a library in waiting. 90 Old history. France is able to get its 4 Leon, 5 Normandy, and 3 Bretagne super dreadnoughts and 4 combat dreadnoughts prior to the World War I and has their pre-dreadnoughts. How do they fare? Well, I suppose some of them could end up having to go or joining the Grand Fleet, but the vast majority of them will be used probably doing something nasty in the Adriatic. You'd probably lose a few more of the submarines, but they probably end up forcing the Adriatic. Might even be used to force Gallipoli, because if you got that size force banked onto the British Mediterranean Fleet, and considering the forces which then would have been added on to the Gallipoli force, they might well have pushed through and taken the cat losses. Anuk, how many kilos of books do you have to pay to access baggage fees to fly back from Canada? I will just say that both my bags, I flew to Canada with 1 hold luggage item. I flew back with 2 hold luggage items, of which both of them I had to pay excess of, which has gone on the credit card. We should have a club called Historians Anonymous where we try to justify our book buying habits. We're historians. We don't need to justify them. We just have to buy them. Great Dominion. And as armed merchant cruiser actions covered in the Big Guns book are armed merchant Big Guns book. Merchant cruisers. Not really. It seems to focus more on the various ships involved. It's got that rather nice painting in it. Let's see. Mm-hmm. There is the fact that, Gneisenau and Scharnhorst coming on a convoy, and they realise that sitting there is HMS Ramillies, and go, you know what? We'd rather not go anywhere near this convoy. Because, yes, whilst on paper we might be able to win this battle, she is armed with 15-inch guns, she is a battleship, and she is designed to be hit by a lot of fire from guns of equivalent caliber. So she can probably keep firing for quite a while. And while we're concentrating on her, the cruisers and destroyers, which are also part of the escort group, might well decide to do something nasty to us. That's a gorgeous picture of ships at sea. Ark Royal and Renown sailing at high speeds at sea. Doug Clarke, I just finished a decent book on Pedestal. I'm starting a spine book on RN Eastern Waters. Cool. I don't think there are armed merchant books in the Big Guns book, though. See, I'm doing library in waiting or library in being. Tempting. How many more renowns would you like to have the R in at the start of World War II? Honestly, if I could have had a pair more renowns and a second hood, I would be a very happy man, especially if all those ships have been modernized and upgraded. Because then the Royal Navy would be in a far better state vis-a-vis fast capital ships, especially if they were included along with 2 Nelson and Rodney and 5 Queen Elizabeths and 5 R-class. So the Royal Navy had somewhere in the region of 20 capital ships at that point. Because a Royal Navy with 20 capital ships has a far better chance at the beginning of World War II than its counterparts. Also, would be quite useful if it had about 10 carriers instead of 7-ish. If a couple of those could be Ark Royals, that'd be quite useful. And if they already had a couple of, I don't know, maybe a couple of Admiral class carriers and a couple of Ark Royals, as well as a couple of Glorious and Furious, Hermes, Eagle, and Argus, that's quite a useful force of carriers to start off World War II with, and quite a useful force of capital ships to start off World War II with. How would France's Washington Naval Treaty tonnage have affected if they'd gotten all their super dreadnoughts around us, and would it kill off the surviving French semi dreadnoughts along with the French pre-dreads? It would kill them off, and it would depend. But also, there'll be an interesting combination if France and Italy have to have parity. Then the Francisco Caracolas come into service. Then, what if all the completed R class have been changed to renowned repulse types, so you got 7? That's an interesting scenario, but that also means, in the nicest way, I then have 7 twin. I then have 7 twin turrets waiting to go. So if you think about it, I've ordered 4 more. So I've ordered 8 times 4. So I've ordered 32 turrets, and then I only used 21. So I have 13 turrets left over, which means I could speed through the creation of 3 hoods or various other things with those twin turrets. What's the indications an author is paddling a book to hit a page count? Usually the trick I use is if you go to the introduction and they give you an outline of the book, and there are whole chapters which are not mentioned in the introduction but which appear in the book. That's usually a fairly good indication. Or if it feels like the introduction has been rewritten with certain sections added in, that's also a good idea. Usually the introduction and the conclusion are a key. What does the conclusion actually mention? What does the introduction actually discuss? If you were to commission HMS Princess Margaret, what would she be? That's an interesting question. That is a very interesting question. I'm not sure. Considering it's a royal name and it's named for a specific royal, it would have to be a capital ship of some kind. These days we don't have. Basically, the Type 83s would have to be big crew. It would have to be big. Right. Next book. Bullen's Voyages: The Life of Frank T. Bullen, sailor, whaler, author. by Alsyon Kennerley. It's an interesting book. The Rags to Riches story recounts the remarkable career of Frank Bullen, who left the grimy streets of London for a life at sea before becoming a best-selling author and one of the brightest stars on the national and international literary stage. His fictional whaling epic, The Cruise of the Cashla, remains in print in any number of editions, but few can now recall the details of his life. Bullen's Voyages is therefore a long overdue tribute to a sailor and writer and focuses on the sea career, which is so prominent in his books. Second to none is vivid writing about days of sail and literary commentator writing in 1917. 2 years after his death, a literary commentator writing in 1917, 2 years after his death, asserted that perhaps no writer has ever written so graphically or systematically of the trials and dangers incurred by merchant sailors. It is an interesting book. It was a book which I have to say, when they sent to me, I was sort of going, really? Okay, I will read this, but I am not expecting much. But it had a lot of character in it, and kind of like Bullen's own work. Haiti was in the throes of becoming a successful revolution against the sovereignty of Spain and France. This led eventually to the separate states of Haiti and Saint Domingo. Port-au-Prince was supposedly blockaded, but the steamer paid no attention to that or to the two warships which would steam up in the approaches. She berthed as usual alongside the company's hulk, which bore a small amount of cargo. And one other steamer in port was flying the American flag. Ashore there was no knowing who had authority, and there was considerable damage to buildings. Either in an error of judgment or taking unofficial leave of absence, a group of Bullen's steamer's crew managed to run ashore, probably drank too much, and managed to fall foul of some or other ragtag military group, who threw them into a lockup for not showing enough respect. This was an ancient cowshed in a pond of sewage, and they were left there overnight. Let out and back on board, their clothing had to be dumped overboard, and the ship's doctor examined them with growing anxiety. Before the ship was finished with the port, a mysterious passenger came alongside from a canoe, with several weighty chests which he kept close sight of. He disappeared below and was rarely seen thereafter. Steam up and at full pressure, all hands were called for stations ready for departure. About the same time, the American steamer, labelled a filibuster by Bullen, left her berth and came alongside Bullen's steamer. A figure stepped from her bridge on board, greeted the captain, and had a private conversation in a chart room, after which the stranger returned to his own ship. As they steamed away, the two vessels kept close together. Immediately after leaving a berth at any time, while maintaining stations, there is not much to do on a steamer as she makes her own departure. So everyone on board Bullen's steamer took in these curious developments of interest. Soon the two steamers were abreast of the two warships, after which the American showed a turn of speed, shouted thanks, and soon disappeared ahead. The warships let off a couple of salvos and began to chase, giving it up as the American got out of range. Then, in Bullen's story, something much more serious claimed everyone's attention. The doctor reported yellow fever had broken out on board. It was common knowledge that yellow fever outbreaks were occurring in many West Indies locations, including Kingston and Port-au-Prince. The first who died was one of the men who had been ashore. The outbreak on board the ship was serious, although Bullen says that none of the passengers were afflicted. The newspaper's death notice in Liverpool about assessed 2 passenger deaths. Of the crew, Bullen says, but of the ship's company, officer, engineers, firemen, sailors, and stewards all gave tide to the death. The disease was terribly swift in its progress. Feeling unwell was quickly followed by delirium, then death. One of the crew ran amok with an axe, and in his madness murdered a man named Carney. Following each death came rapid preparations for a sea burial and a very short committal. The loss of regular crew was filled from Brinkburn's DPS group, for whom the money was welcome, but duty as fireman unwelcome. Tommy Bullen was not immune. He writes... Well, get the book if you're interested in reading it. It's a good book. Hi, that's good. Next one, what was the point of a semi-dreadnought battleship? It wasn't. There wasn't a point to a semi-dreadnought battleship. They were built at a time when dreadnoughts were coming into service, but they weren't quite sure, and they were still building their pre-dreadnought design. So they were a pre-dreadnought updated as much as it could in a dreadnought world. This is was HMS Hendrix of Fluke Jutland? If not, how was she so good? It's kind of like there is a look. You have Admiral Lee aboard his ship, and he achieves a significant level of accuracy. HMS Iron Duke is a certain admiral's flagship. In the nicest way, he is a gunnery expert. Can you imagine that he has not spent personal time with every single one of the gunnery officers and a fairly large number of their gunnery crew, explaining to them how accurately he wants his guns to fire? There is the gunnery standards he will accept from most ships. There is the gunnery standards he will accept from the flagships in his fleet. And then there is the gunnery standard he will accept from his own flagship. Those are different things. Lance, on a similar line, what do you think Age of Dragonum would be? Again, I hope for a Type 83, but I know there are various other ideas going around. I don't Squared Lion. I've answered Lion's question. Remember, I don't know how big the 83s will be, but can we kind of name one dainty or delight and send it to the SES? No, because we've already had the D class. That's the Type 45s. And report, what names do you think the Type 83 will get, assuming 8 to 12 get built? I'm not diving into that because that's in my in the paper with Drak Innefel that we've written. Dr. Clarke, I know our boat people, but I am indeed of an aviation palette cleanser. Any suggestions? Not off the top of my head. There are some good ones. Eric Winkle Brown actually has some good books to read. He writes some good books about flying aircraft. I know he's technically boat service, but you know. So, another book I picked up at the joyous thing that was Tankfest. Monsters of the Royal Navy. And I was wondering how Battle Tanks of the Sea became was a book available there, but there were lots of good books there. And I had fun with a selection. And again, lots of good lots of good pictures, including this one. It's a nice book to read. It cost me all of £7. Somewhat to the surprise, the Admiralty found there were ships very roughly answering the requirements of monitors available for immediate purchase. See drawing 1. The Brazilian Navy decided that it required some heavily armed monitors, about 1,500 tons, to work on its river system, especially on the River Amazon. An order was placed with Vickers of Barrow for 3 such vessels in 1912. The ships completed their trials in December 1913, made ready for voyage across the Atlantic. There was a problem, however, in that the Brazilians had been hit by a decline in the price of their main export, rubber, due to the fact that seeds from rubber trees had been smuggled out of the country and found to flourish in British-controlled Malaya. The unfortunate Brazilians suddenly found that they could not pay for their monitors. These ships were held in dock at Barrow and Vickers, eagerly sought to find a buyer to replace their newly impoverished customers. The little ships were, however, so strange that no one could be found who was prepared to pay for them. Just before war broke out, the Admiralty, luckily for Vickers, became concerned about a number of warships being built in British yards. Foreign powers. There was a battleship and destroyers for Turkey, for example, destroyers for Greece, and destroyers and battleships for Chile. All of whose attitude in the impending war was anything but certain. So the British government took the decision to take all these ships over to prevent them from falling into the hands of potential enemies. At the same time, they could place some powerful new vessels into the hands of the Royal Navy. The Brazilian monitors were included in the deal, not because the Navy particularly wanted them, but to prevent them from somehow falling into the wrong hands. It is easy to understand why the Brazilian gunboats were unwanted. They cost £155,000 each, a little more than a contemporary destroyer. For the sake of comparison, a Queen Elizabeth-class battleship cost about £4 million, and mounted 2 6-inch guns in a single forward-facing Vickers turret. For comparative purposes, it's worth remembering that the classic French field artillery piece, the 75, for a shell of about £12. The latest British M-class destroyer had 4-inch guns with shells of 25 to £30. The 6-inch guns on the monitors fired £100 shells. They are thus far more formidable than any field artillery. They also had very powerful secondary armament in the form of 2 4.7-inch howitzers, both on the afterdeck, ideal for riverine bombardment work, and 4 3-pounders and 6 machine guns for self-protection. Unlike destroyers, they had quite heavy protective armor, 3/4 to a full-inch deck, 2-inch over magazines, 1.5 to 3-inch side belt, and 4-inch turret faces. This all made them quite effective floating gun platforms, but gun platforms strictly for river work, not for the open sea. For propulsion, they had 1,450 horsepower triple expansion engines with dual-fired oil and coal boilers, giving them about 12 knots in still water. They had extremely shallow draft, only 4 foot 9 inches, and just 1 foot 6 inches freeboard. so that in anything approaching a seaway, the whole deck was constantly awash. To achieve their shallow draft and carry their 1,250-ton weight, they had to be extremely beamy, being 49 feet wide and 267 feet long, giving a length to beam ratio of 5 to 4 to 1, 5.4 to 1, as against a 10 to 1 for a typical destroyer. The two propellers were 5 foot 7 inches in diameter, 10 inches more than their draft, so they had to be housed in tunnels under the hull. This at first made the ships impossible to control astern, a problem which had to be overcome by fitting larger twin rudders and a flap over the stern to control the water flow to the propellers. Altogether, they were a seaman's nightmare and underpowered, underhandy, and unable to cope with heavy seas. They did have one feature which raised the royal smile of their officers. The standard of luxury demanded by the Brazilian Navy was incredibly high. The cabins and messes were beautifully finished in polished tropical woods, and leather-covered furniture might have graced the first-class lounge of the proudest ocean liner. The captains selected for these strange vessels were Commander Fullerton, of 7, Lieutenant Commander Wilson, Mersey, and Commander Snag, Humber. Officers were a mixture of regulars from Royal Navy Reserve and Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, and seamen were all reservists. When the three monitors were commissioned into the British service, their shortcomings soon became evident. They are sluggish, impossible to control in a crosswinds, very difficult to make go astern, and dominantly wet. Indeed, Humber was almost swamped when an anchor just outside the harbour mouth. They're also unsuitable for service with the Grand Fleet, but it was thought that until one or other of the outflanking schemes were authorised, they might be useful to the Dover patrol. Off they set for Dover from Barrow, only to encounter a strong gale in the Irish Sea. Waves soon washed over the decks, and the water came in through the ventilation hatches, flooding the crew's quarters and threatening to reach the engine rooms. The crew had to be accommodated in officers' quarters throughout the voyage, as their own remained awash. The strong winds made the flat-bottomed hulls skid sideways, and they wallowed heavy and horribly in swells. It was a severe ordeal for the crews, and showed clearly that river boats, however excellent for their intended purposes, are not safe at sea. To add insult to injury, they looked so strange they were almost fired on twice by coastal guns, held under arrest off Dover by the guard ship who mistook them for strange enemy intruders. All three did eventually arrive at Dover, however, and they were to do sterling service, as we shall see later. These little ships lacked the underwater protection, the ammunition capacity, and firepower of later monitors. Also, the weather often caused them to have to cease operations and head for shelter. But they were to prove most useful ships, performing feats which would be impossible for any other type of vessel. Their success caused the Admiralty to take a favourable view of the armed monitor as a type, and plan for more ambitious variations of the same theme. Always nice to know that your production of ships for other people will make things available. Hello, Dutch God. Right, I'm going to put that's going to knock my amber off that list, so I will move that to there. I think 683. Would it be a fair assumption that the Alsace class its subvariants, the Ricklow class its subvariants, and the Dunkirk class were intended to replace France's super dreadnoughts? To an extent, yes. It's fair to assume that. It's fair to assume it. Right. So, third time you said hello to me tonight, Dr. Clarke. Well, that's good. You keep saying you do say hi all, so I presume you've gone away and come back. So I say hello. Say hello again. Da 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 da. All right. Anything else going on? I do know some of the suggestions. I'm gonna have to do this again. I'm gonna have to do the suggestion of what food I should get again. Nice hearing. Do French battleships deserve their bad rep? Okay, so The point about French dreadnoughts, which is often forgotten, is they are the best the French can build at the time. So, yeah, they are, in comparison to most of their counterparts, they are not good ships. But that's because of the legacy of the Juno Cole and damage it did to the French infrastructure. So, actually, hello. If anyone sneezes, you always come check on us, don't you? You're a good boy. So let's put it this way. I'm happy. I do make take a bit of fun. I'll make a bit of fun of the French pre-dreads and some of the French battleships because they are so ludicrously out of place compared to their counterparts. But I also know the reason behind it. And as I've said, let's put it this way. It's going to be an interesting discussion this week's live because it's going to be a case of, yeah, we are talking about French cruiser policy in the 1920s and yeah. Hang on, is this week? This week is the French cruiser policy. 1920s and 1930s, and that's going to go back a lot. It's going to start off with the Juno Cole School and move forward, and the legacy of the Juno Cole, and the legacy of World War I, and the legacy of what happens to them. Thank you, Jangle. Lions, was there ever a name decided there was going to be a third Queen Elizabeth class carrier? Ark Royal is what it would have been if there had been a third one. There was discussions at certain points. But it would Queen Elizabeth, Prince of Wales, Ark Royal. Like the Invincible class. Invincible, Illustrious, Ark Royal. It would been Queen Elizabeth, Prince of Wales, Ark Royal. You're going to let us choose a meal for you? No. Don't take this the wrong way, but it's kind of like I've learnt from my good friend Drakinafel when it comes to questions. I'm quite happy to let them going live this week. Of course, there will be the suggestions for July's topics going live this week and taking suggestions on Patreon. That post will probably go up tomorrow. And it'll be a case of, and it's always a case of, I take the suggestions and then I do some edits if I need to on them. And then I put it to a vote, and then you will vote for that, and then 2 of those get done, or if 3, if you've rigged the voting somehow. I do know you do that. And the point is, that's a good way of ensuring I've never had to worry about the quality of questions, but the quantity is manageable. And it's similar with the food. In the nicest way, I love you all dearly, but I have got the lesson of the Blackburn, and of Boaty McBoatyface. I know you all know I do not know that I am a carnivore, and if I let you select the actual dishes and vote for that, I would end up with vegetarian food. And as much as I respect and support vegetarians in their choice, if that's their choice, it's not for me, and it's not my system. So, in the nicest way, whilst I know you would all go with their sense of humour, I am not setting up a scenario where that can happen. Although I do like some of the suggestions coming through for fundraising for us for our trip, which we're going to be sort of our next trip. Next naval history trip, which we're looking at and working. And as said, there is possibly going to be a scenario which involves Dan looking at making sure that neither me or Drakinafel kill ourselves with hot wings and stand by with milk to make while we're answering questions. I'm worried you might have plague. If you have plague, I might have to eat you. I would be sad, but you'll be tasty. Nah, my fluff does something like that. Pizza pepperoni. Always pizza pepperoni. More power to the carnivores. Thank you, George Newman. Yeah. Alright, so it's now questions to the end time because I've gone through all 7 books I wanted to go through, and this is all I've got in terms of remaining Iron Brew. So, questions to the end. Let the questions rain. I knew I shouldn't have mentioned the Blackburn. I knew I shouldn't have mentioned it. And I have decided that I'm going to start trying to record 60-second videos on naval questions whenever I'm going for my walk on a Sunday. So if you have questions if you have questions you think can be answered in 60 seconds, I'm going to put up a comment on the community page, which is basically going to be 60-second topic suggestions here. And basically, please find it. And if I like one of the questions, I will attempt to answer in 60 seconds for a short video that will go up every Sunday morning while I'm wandering and walking through the wilds of Surrey somewhere, or wherever I happen to be. Colin Karen, Doc, do you want to see if you think I would suggest a nice falafel bar I went to the other day rather than the sake restaurant? I know you, Colin. Were there any engagements between tanks and ships or boats in either World War? Tons. Ones where the tanks could shoot back. Yes, there was actually some between the Canadian Army had a nice run-in with some German river flotillas vessels which really couldn't fight back. They did try to fight back, but they were basically had the same weapons as the tanks, but they had no armor. There were lots of engagements between tanks and destroyers at places like, during D-Day, of course, and various other operations like that, but also during Dunkirk, there were engagements. The Royal Navy took on, tribal class destroyers made a great thing of taking on guns mounted on trains. So armored trains were a common thing they ended up having fights with. So there is a constant running thing of tanks and ships having a fight. Just looked at the Sidron the Great. The KVLS system able to accommodate and launch bigger missiles than the Mark 41. It's adaptable, let's say. I'm not sure whether it can operate more than the Mark 41 in its current configuration, but I've heard there are other options. Judgment. Hey, on Patreon vote, I vote for every question I find interesting. Can I help it if I usually find I'm interested in every topic suggested? That's ignorant. Did the French have any cruiser plans other than Algeria? They had lots of cruiser plans. The French like cruisers. See McDevitt. Why do so many ships with container-based mission modules have their own crane? It seems that there is plenty of cranes ashore that could handle that and reduce the ship's mass and complexity. Yeah, but cranes ashore might have got destroyed. You might not be uploading in the same place, and also you're probably carrying a crane anyway for dealing with your boats and various other things. The crane is actually quite a useful piece of kit for a ship to be carrying. And look, are there still UK shipyards capable of building freighters or liners, or are there only similar yards building military ships? Well, Camel Lairs, etc. can do general construction. There's some talk about what Portsmouth and Appledore could construct. Basically, there are most of the shipyards do just produce naval stuff, but there are a few there's a ferry shipyard up in Scotland and a few other things like that. So there is some civilian manufacturing capability, not much though, because it cannot compete on a cost basis with the huge yards and the volume of production from Korea, etc. As I often say, vegetarians eat my food's food. They're my food's direct competition. Someone, what are your opinions on the shark taking over for the Mark 6 PBR with the USN. I'd have to look into it more. But would the British people support war with the US over the Trent affair, since it might have been seen as helping the South beat the Union and continue slavery? It would depend on how the Americans handled it. If the Americans had actually fired on a British warship, then I'm sorry, yes, it would have been. It's a case of we don't want to entering the war to support the South. That would not have been popular. Entering the war because the Americans insulted the UK and basically declared war on us, that would have been supported. So it's a context nuanced one. Did the French Navy have any light cruiser model one? That's going to be a question which I'm probably going to get to in the live on Thursday. Okay, do you see any future naval guns larger than 5-inch? I wouldn't be surprised if it could get bigger again. Let's folks, do you know any picture of books about the naval history on that of my home, the Isle of Man? I know we had a Viking infestation for a long while. Oh. What do you want? What's up? Hello. There is a book, but I'm trying to find it. I think you're. Ooh. Nope, not that one. There is a book by Matthew Richardson which might work for your needs, but I'm not sure really. Which is all about the Isle of Man, which you can find, and there is. Yeah, I think that there aren't really that many books on it. Not on the Isle of Man as a naval history. I think that's pretty much your only option to go to is is Matthew Richardson's book. I think. I'm having a look and checking, but I'd say I'd say you pretty much have a choice of Matthew Richardson on the Isle of Man, or anyone. Well, that's about it. There aren't really that many. The trouble is the Isle of Man's a bit sort of ignored because it's rather small and it's stuck between two far more interesting topics called Britain and Ireland, and occasionally Wales. Yeah, battleships and even destroyers usually come off better versus tanks. Tanks have effectively killed the armored river monster as a category. Yep. Jeff, did not a German tank group find itself engaging HMS Rodney during the Operation Overlord? Well, what happened was there were some German tanks which had formed up, which were about to make a breakthrough, and the forward artillery observer put a call. Met said, "Is anyone free?" And they got a message back saying, "Free, we're free. Give us target." And they gave them the target, and they weren't quite sure what was going to come through. They gave them the map reference and along the position on the map. And a few minutes later, 16-inch shells started raining down on tanks. And it's yes, tanks are not designed to be hit by that much explosive. They are not. You might be the best tank known to mankind. You're not designed to be hit by that much explosive. Not even modern tanks are designed to be hit by that much explosive. It's basically a case of, oh, sugar. Yes. Hello. We have arrived. in little pieces. I think one actually. The thing is, when you've got that much high explosive range down around you, you don't even need a direct impact to wreck your tank. Your tank's probably wrecked by the sheer being in the proximity of it arriving. Why don't we hear much about these other cruiser projects the French had? Because they didn't build them and because of what happened to France during World War II. They went from preparing to carry on fighting to their government falling apart to surrendering in like a 4-week almost space of time, which shocked everyone so much that it led to all sorts of things going wrong. Any thoughts of Russians recently running through their own minefields? I know it's Bilge-Trump's territory. It will be interesting to talk about on Bilge-Trumps. Azowski, your thoughts on French World War II destroyers, especially 2,400-ton type? Were they anything useful or rather a dead end? They could have been very useful if they'd been carried on being developed. They were, big destroyers, I have a lot of time for. I think a big destroyer is actually a good idea. Of 2,000 to 3,000 ton model seems to be a sensible area in World War II. Seems to be viable, seems to be a good idea. Let's see where it could go. Doc, I know the Thames does not have the largest tidal range, but it is significant. So, have any ships been beached below the new London Bridge since it was built along the embankment? Not recently, but I remember my dad talking about one. But I can't remember it. But it's not been something sort of recently. Since the central port of London was being closed down, it's not really been the case that it's been going on. So I don't think in my lifetime, but there have been some ships have some interesting times. Out. 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 Thank you. I don't know. Mosquitoes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, Doctor, I found a lovely company in the Pacific Northwest that you and Drac may want to check out. Lifeproof is their name, and their 44 tender can run a 55 to 60 knots with a comfortable cruise of 50. Cool. Calling from Doc, really? Don't mention that ferry yard. That is a whole can of worms no one wants to touch. Life happens. Next, where did the myth that World War II era armored ships would not be sunk by modern missiles start? Basically, it starts with people going, but if you hit an airport, if you take a modern aircraft and slam into a bunker, the bunker survives. And you go, yes, there's a difference between the bunker and a ship. It's not floating in water and wobbling up and down. And there is a small issue. Yeah, nicest way. The best defense of a ship is subdivision. Armor is useful. There are some advantages to an armored ship from World War II versus a modern missile. It probably has greater internal armoring and thicker bulkheads, and to an extent thicker bulkheads, but it also is made of different steel, and it would handle it in a different manner. So it's half a dozen one, six of the other, and probably works out at roughly the same chances as the modern vessel. If we're being honest, probably. And that's before we get into the whole thing of, well, if you really want to, yes, we did. There are some missiles which are literally flying buses. A 7-ton missile cramming into you is going to do a massive amount of. There's even one person I think on Twitter the other day was talking going, well, yes, but if we discount the warhead, the missile hitting is not going to do any damage. But the whole point of the missile hitting is there is a freaking big warhead, a frigating big warhead hitting you. A frigating big warhead, indeed. What are you up to? Mm-hmm. Good boy.
your mummy finds out you've got this in your hair, she's going to absolutely cane you. There you go, that's out. Stop going and getting cherry stones in your hair. Andrew Paul, I would say no land vehicle is designed to take a direction from 16-inch high explosive shell. No, there just isn't. You could theoretically design a tank to it, but it wouldn't be able to move that fast. Constance, what was the golden age of naval history here historiography? Oof. Don't get me started on that. It's a whole debate to be had. There's a period when naval historians were absolute rock stars. Let's be honest. People like Corbett and Mahan weren't just famous in their fields, they were famous people, full stop. They were rock stars in many respects. And then there's, times when honestly the historiography is probably better and the history is probably better, but the people aren't as famous. It's a whole debate. Snake Island got taken back by Ukraine, so Biltrums will have to talk about that. Yeah, we will do eventually. JC, regarding the latest Chinese aircraft carrier that was recently launched from Sea Trials 03, why are parts of the deck obscured by long black rectangular boxes? What are they obscuring? They are obscuring the catapult launch mechanisms. So, yeah, that's what they're obscuring. Well, yes, the mouse might have tried to take on a 16-inch shell. It wouldn't have survived the 16-inch shell. That's right. Why was Arizona's position in Pearl Harbor so fatal? The same reason Gilles Cesare's position in Taranto is so successfully survivable. It's literally, it's luck. It's the position you are when the aircraft come in, what they can line up, distance from shore, position in harbor, ability to maneuver. It's all those things. If you become a very easy target to line up on, you're going to be dead. If you become a very difficult target to line up on, you're going to survive. Given that Hellfire is now the USN's Halo-borne anti-ship missile, a Yamato versus DDG debate ends with a high explosive anti-tank missile hit on every 18-inch barrel. Really? Would they even need to bother with that? They wouldn't hit the barrel. They'd be going for the joins between the barrel and the gun mounting and the turret, and just going in there. You wouldn't need to hit every single one. You just need to hit one on each turret. You make the turret go boom. If you've got anything else in your hair, you are not getting protected by me. Thank you, thank you, Richards. Well, 16-inch gun makes a 50-foot deep, 150-foot wide hole in the ground. Would the tank fall in or become buried by the earth falling back down on it? The tank usually ceases to be part of the earth and becomes more part of the atmosphere on an almost molecular level if it's a close contact hit. Basically, China doesn't want us to know they either have EM catapults or they messed up and are embarrassed to only have steam catapults. Either way, if we don't know, we don't know. That chip is full of potential. What was an unprotected cruiser? Early name for a light cruiser, pretty much. But as it says, you had a protected cruiser. You had armored cruiser, protected cruiser, first class, second class, third class, protected cruiser, and then you had unprotected cruiser, which had no armor. Third class had armor. Second class had, oh, that's nice. And first class had, oh, okay, might survive. Armor cruiser had, oh, We should survive as long as we don't fight a battleship. And battleship had, hello, come bash me. So, you know, that was the difference. Come on, guys. Even the 6-inch-ish Soviet era 152mm has the ability to flip over an MBT with a near miss. See Fragment knocking out T-72s recently from 122mm. Yeah, 122mm is pretty nasty stuff when it wants to be. Colin Cameron, this is probably one for the Beltrons, but instead of ICBM hypersonics, could we see scramjets used to avoid identification issues? Yep. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's probably what we will see in terms of hypersonics. I'm reckoning scramjets are probably going to be the reality. People are going to accelerate so they can get there first with an ICBM-based system, and then they are going to actually practical systems are going to be scramjet-based before the differential, basically. I see. Why did unprotected cruisers, protected cruisers, and armor cruisers vanish by World War II? Treaties. That's an easy one to answer. Treaties. Once you start defining things down. Take care, Sage. Then, were I to be preparing war games for any naval and navy other than People's Army, Liberation Army Navy, I'd be assuming the type of series 03 is better than a sales pitch I'd heard by a notch at least. Yeah, because that's the sensible thing to do. Hello. Yeah. Right, then, everyone. I think we're sort of running out of questions, and I'm almost finished with Iron Brew. So I'm going to say last questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I hope you've liked. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for all the patron support. Thank you for all the subscribers. Thank you for all the super chats. Thank you for all the super thanks, the things that people do on the long patrol, on the recorded videos. And thank you for all the people who watch the videos. It's really helpful. Hello. I'm not sure why but my fluffy research assistant is deciding to get involved in saying thank you to everyone. Hello. Yes. What's the problem? What do you want? You want to say thank you? Okay. Well, you can come here and say thank you to them. You want a biscuit to come say thank you. You want to say thank you to people, but you want a biscuit for it. Seriously, my budget goes entirely on giving you biscuits and books, doesn't it? It goes on BBs, biscuits and books. That's all what I spend all my money on. And you have no qualms about it at all, do you? No, you don't. I know. Right. So, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this evening. And I'm going to answer the last questions, finish off the Iron Brew, and then go. Probably about 10 o'clock my time, which will mean this has been about a 4-hour live. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let's see. Has anyone conducted a real amphibious landing since Falklands War? Well, there was the invasion of Afghanistan, which was technically amphibious because it was launched from quite a lot of ships at one point. Sections of it. There's the Alfor Peninsula in the Second Gulf War. There's been a few sort of smallish operations and various things done, which are technically amphibious operations, including, I think, Sierra Leone. But that's an interesting one. Thank you, Colin Cameron. That's right. I know protected cruisers and armor cruisers were still active in South America, Southeast Asia in the 1930s and 1940s. Yes, but that's in places which, honestly, to an extent, don't count. Calm down. You're hungry. You want to go for your food. That's why you're complaining. Yes, okay. No, I can't let you in the house at the moment. But I know someone who can. Okay. I sent the message. No, Raleigh. Andrew Paul. Thank you for a great class. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Dafford and Dan. Thanks, Tracy. Andrew Paul. Well, by 1910ish, you could get armor on light cruisers as well, making unprotected cruisers basically obsolete since they were techno-financial trade-off. Pretty much, yeah. Thank you, Alzowski. Thank you, Andrew Paul. Thank you, Dr. I got to see Admiral Sprawl lecture recently. That was fun. He is a big doggy. Anik, has the fluffy research assistant forgiven you from leaving him? No, he never forgives me for leaving him. He just demands more biscuits. Thank you, Colin Curran, again for that. Nice one. What was the last protected cruiser and armor cruiser still active by World War II? Oof. You asked the question still active, not the question of which one was still in service, and for that I'd have to look up. Because there are a list of vessels which are still in service by World War II, theoretically, but active means they're actually able to go to sea rather than just sitting in harbour, still technically flying a flag and technically commissioned. And that's a different thing, so I'd have to do some actual research to check that one out. Right, do it. I have to go decorate the cemetery this evening for tomorrow. Good luck. Take care, George Newman. Thank you. I'm always happy to have weird questions. That's what I live for. This is what I like. I like doing seminars, and I like doing. It's going to sound strange. I always treat the lives as seminars, and I treat the recorded videos as lectures, and I treat the Sunday videos, especially with the book discussions, as sort of what I would call revision seminars, where basically any questions are a go because it's for a revision session. So it's me sitting here going, "What are your questions from the course this year, people? Please ask questions. Let's see if we can't answer them." Thank you, Tanner Faker. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Buggate89. Thank you, Red. Thank you, George Newman and Paul. Thank you. Andrew Paul. Correction. Last armor cruiser so was probably ARA Perodin. She was decommissioned in August 1954. That would probably be right. Great Dominion. Grenada Invasion 1983 involved an amphibious landing, did not? Yes. They did. Although it did annoy a certain prime minister. Thank you, JLF. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you found it useful. So, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again. Take care. And I am now going to go sort out the fluffy research assistant and make sure he gets in where he wants to, because it's dinner time. Because it's time for his third meal of the day. Actually, no, hang on. Yeah. He's on 3 meals a day. The Tafra is on 4. Tafra has a small tummy. They both get well fed, trust me. There is more debate put into their food than what I get, and definitely more debate than what some people, other people in this house overeat. Take care, everyone. Have fun, and a bat just flew over. Thank you. Take care. Oh, and while I remember it, as well as the lives and the Patreon, which is going sort of to select suggestions, which are going to go live this week. On terms of the French and the Italian cruisers and the Italian cruise document, if anyone knows of any sources which they think I won't have heard of, because I've been trawling through most of the English language and most of the translated works I can get to for the French and the Italian sources. If you have other ones which are more recent and you think I might have missed of, please do feel free to send them or suggest them to me on Discord. I'd really like to hear them, because I'm trying to make them as accurate as I can do. Anyway, take care, thank you, and yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Take care.